Everybody's
Okay, Mr. Travellini is not here yet. Mr. Rodelius?
here.
Mr. Leonard?
Here.
Mr. DiGiovanni?
Here.
Ms. Barabana?
Here.
Mr. Walter?
Here.
Mr. First is not here. Ms. Christie? Here. Chairwoman Gutschall.
Here.
Adequate notice of this meeting of the Bedminster Township Land Use Board was filed with the Township Clerk, sent to the Bernardsville News and the Courier News, and to all subscribers, and posted at the Township Municipal Building, 1 Miller Lane, Bedminster, New Jersey, on January 6, 2022.
Please stand for the flag salute.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, let's open it up to the public. Janine, let's see if we have anybody on.
There is only one person that I don't recognize, Jack Simon.
Okay.
You are public, or you're part of the applicant, or do you have anything? Part of the applicant, no public.
Okay, so then we'll close it to the public, and we can go to our pending applications. We have Siegelman Estate. We still haven't,
Paul has not given us a letter just yet, but he does believe that they will be able to be heard at the first April meeting.
okay, all right, that's good. And we still haven't heard from Route 206, or that is scheduled? No,
That is not
it is
scheduled.
not.
We have not received anything from them.
It's still postponed. Okay, all right, we can go right ahead to PPAC Gladstone Bank. We're missing some lights here, I think. Um,
There you go.
And then there was light. Yep, we're ready.
Is it working?
Oh, yes, it is.
Okay.
Yes.
Good evening. My name is Wendy Berger from the law firm of Cole Schatz. I'm here representing the applicant this evening. The applicant, as you all know, is PPAC Gladstone Bank. The property in question is 500 550 Hills Drive, lot 59.26, lot 11.2. We're here this evening for preliminary and final site plan approval to construct a branch bank building with drive-through ATM and some changes to the parking. There's certain variances are needed as part of this application. The variances include floor area ratio, signs, parking setback, and some design waivers with regard to illumination. This property had received approval in 2016 for additions and changes to the parking lot.
Parking, yeah.
Not all, that hasn't been accomplished as of yet.
Okay.
We don't want to lose that approval. We're putting in a few of those parking spaces as a result of that approval as part of this application, because in the future, things might change, and maybe more people will be coming to offices, and maybe there'll be need for those parking spaces in the future. And the board and its experts spent a lot of time reviewing it, analyzing it, and determining how it should lay out. So we want to preserve that in case things change again in the world, and we do need that. But this application this evening is really with regard to the bank.
Okay.
So my first witness this evening, I have 5 witnesses, and I don't know if you want to swear them in all together.
Well, then we'll leave that to our attorney. Tom, how do you want to handle that?
Why don't we do one at a time, but make sure we don't forget. Thanks.
Okay. I didn't realize he was on the screen.
He
I'm
is.
sorry.
He is here.
Hello, Wendy, I'm here.
Okay.
Tom Collins, you did a great job introducing it. Thanks.
Okay, then I'll proceed with my first witness, if that's
Okay,
okay with
very
the
good.
board.
Mhm.
Oh, and also, we have received a few reports from your experts, and we will
Yes.
discuss them as part of the testimony this evening. So if I miss something, just call out.
We will do
Happy
that.
to answer them.
Yeah, we will do that.
Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Plant, stand and just state your name to the board because you're sworn in.
Sure. My name is Robert Plant. I'm the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer for PPAC Gladstone Bank.
Okay.
Mr. Plant, please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
So,
Please
yeah,
state your address.
The speaker's right there, and it'll pick up your voices, yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Plant, you're familiar with the property in question?
Correct. My office resides within 500 Hills.
And with regard to the property in question, could you tell the board, without me asking you a million questions, a little bit about the bank, how long it's been in town, how long it's been in the building, and why it wants to proceed?
Sure.
Well, I turn off my phone, I'm sorry.
Happy to do so. So first, good evening. Thank you for entertaining our application. A little bit about the bank. You may well be aware, the bank was founded in 1921, so we've just celebrated our centennial anniversary. Over the now 100-plus years, our mission really has not changed. It's to provide value-added banking services to our community in an environment of integrity and trust. Our business is predominantly in New Jersey, and more specifically in Hunterdon, Morris, Somerset, and Union counties. Our headquarters is at 500 Hills Drive. The original lease for 500 Hills Drive was secured in 2009, and that was 33,000 square feet, so the top floor, the third floor of that building. So we're 13-year tenants at 500 Hills. Since 2009, we have expanded our footprint 6 times, and we currently occupy over 80,000 square feet in that building, so approximately 80% of 500 Hills constitutes our footprint. We have other offices across Morris and Essex counties, but 500 Hills is our corporate headquarters. There are over 260 PPAC Gladstone Bank employees that are resident at 500 Hills. We've experienced significant growth over the last 10 years at the bank. 10 years ago, a new CEO, Doug Kennedy, was hired. At the time, the bank was $1.2 billion in assets. Today, we're $6.2 billion in assets, and so that's as of year-end 2021. We have 3 primary businesses. We have a retail banking business, which includes 19 branches, 9 in Somerset County, 7 in Morris County, 3 in Hunterdon County, and 1 in Union County. We have a commercial banking business, which includes commercial real estate lending, multifamily lending, commercial and industrial lending, equipment leasing, small business administration loans, and corporate advisory, which is fancy nomenclature for mid-market M&A. As of 12/31/2021, we had an $11 billion wealth management business, which included the largest New Jersey bank-owned trust company, and wealth management services, which includes several New Jersey-based registered investment advisor, RIA, acquisitions over the past 7 years. So when you think about our business, think retail, commercial, and wealth management. We're a publicly traded company. We trade on NASDAQ under the symbol of PGC. For the last 100 years, we've been committed to our communities and our employees, and our totals for 2021 demonstrate those efforts. We have over 210 charitable organizations that we support through PPAC Gladstone Bank. We donated over $420,000 to these charitable organizations in 2021. Our employees contributed over 1,100 hours of community service, and over 485 employees out of our 500 employees participated in community service activities. American Banker Association named us one of the best banks to work for in America in 2018, in 2019, in 2020, and in 2021. So for the last 4 years, we've been recognized as one of the best banks to work for in the United States. Some examples of the charities that we participate in. Many of you may be familiar with the Far Hills Race Meeting. We're one of the primary sponsors for that. The proceeds from that benefit local health organizations. I personally organized a Northern Morris County Christmas tree sales effort to donate over $27,000 to Nourish NJ, which provides lasting solutions for problems of hunger, homelessness, and poverty across New Jersey. In 2020, Nourish NJ distributed over 750,000 pounds of food for guests to take home with them. And so they're one of our primary charitable organizations as well. Other organizations include Habitat for Humanity, Raritan Headwaters, Grow a Row, and I can provide a complete list if need be. The Hills Village Center branch, and in our nomenclature we call that the Pluckerman branch. The original lease for the branch is dated 1987, so we are 35-year tenants in that building. The lease expires 12/31/2023, so in just over a year and a half. It's approximately 5,000 square feet. It typically has 4 to 5 employees working in it at any point in time. And it does approximately 2,700 teller transactions per month, which in our world, in our industry, isn't considered especially busy. About 60% of those transactions are retail and 40% of the transactions are small business. As you're probably well aware, significant changes have occurred in the banking industry over the last 10 years. Two areas in particular are mergers and acquisitions and also digital transformation. The M&A has had 2 significant effects on our industry. There are fewer banks by count. In 2011, there were 8,000 FDIC governed banks, and today there are 5,000. Fewer banks typically means fewer branches as a result of acquisitions where you have overlapping territories. Banks tend to close branches as a means for cutting expenses and improving their profitability. Evolutionary changes in digital banking channels and tools have also had a very real impact. We've seen a significant reduction, as I said, in the number of physical branches and banks reallocating that capital towards technology and technological solutions, and a significant reduction in teller transactions, which equates to branch visits. For us, ourselves, in the last 10 years, our teller transactions across our branch network have dropped by over 50%, and pre-COVID or post-COVID, they've dropped 27%. So we have seen significant reduction in branch visits and branch transactions. Alongside this, the role of the branch is evolving from transaction-oriented to more advice, as well as being more of a billboard for the community so that they know that there's a financial institution in their backyard. Generally, smaller branch space requirements are really where people are headed. Having said all of that, I think this is an important time to state that our goal, Peapack Gladstone Bank's goal, is to remain an independent, publicly traded bank. The primary method for us to do that is to maintain that goal is to provide our investors with superior economic returns. For us, that's earnings per share and our market value as indicated by our stock price. So why build and move? The consumer's use of digital banking technologies and the reduction of teller transactions have impacted physical space requirements as well as client preferences on how that space is used. 5,000 square foot footprint is just too large for us today in a retail banking environment. As a bank in that space, it would be particularly difficult to shrink the footprint and have another company co-located, the security considerations are really just too great to accommodate another tenant. Economically, we believe that we can build exactly what we want and actually improve our expense profile. The building at the Pluckerman branch is dated. As I said, we're a 35-year tenant, and we feel building to our new specifications has a better overall result for our clients and for ourselves and for the community. So in summary, Peapack Gladstone Bank, has been a thoughtful, caring, and contributing member of the community for over 100 years. We consistently are recognized for our employees' involvement and contributions to their communities. The banking industry has and will continue to evolve as digital channels and tools evolve, and that will continue to impact our retail branches. And our goal is really to build a modern, state-of-the-art branch that blends the best of face-to-face client interactions, advice-led interactions, and digital capabilities. So I want to thank you for your consideration of our proposal tonight.
And just one more question. With all this effort, you're doing this so you could stay in town and continue to serve the needs of the public?
Yes,
In town?
yep, that's correct. Yep.
Mhm.
We worked very closely with the landlord. As you may know, there's a new landlord over the last 2 years for 550 Hills, and they've been actively involved in this effort, and I really appreciate that. They've demonstrated themselves to be a caring landlord as well.
Okay. Public, board, anybody questions?
Oh, yeah, I have a question. I mean, you've obviously been a good neighbor. Everything I read, it's always sponsored by Peapack Gladstone Bank, so you've definitely given back. I appreciate that. Why are you moving just right across the street? I mean, how large is that building now versus what you want to build?
Right.
Are you having problems? Is this just to save some money?
No,
What's going on?
it's a combination. So the current footprint is 5,000 square feet, and it's too large for what we're doing today, and given the level of transactions that we conduct on a monthly basis.
3,000.
And the way that the building is constructed, and it makes it very difficult if we were to try to bifurcate that, upgrade it, and have a separate tenant literally next door, considering we're a bank. And so the complexity associated with that is, it's very difficult. The new facility is, I think we said it was 1,300 square feet. Footprint is 1,300 square
Oh,
feet.
footprint.
It's basement.
Two-story? Two-story?
Correct,
Yeah,
basement,
yeah,
and then a ground floor.
1677, and then the 5,000
Yeah.
and stuff.
And so as you can see, it's smaller, it's considerably smaller than the 5,000 square
Yeah.
foot footprint that we're currently.
People still use it. Oh, I'm sorry, go
So
ahead.
economics-wise, to build a whole new building, two-story building, is it going to be better off than just using a 5,000 square foot existing?
Yeah, from an economics perspective, we believe that it will be beneficial for us.
Long-term.
And I don't claim to be an accountant, so bear with me. The magic of accounting allows you to amortize construction projects of this nature. I believe it's over 30 years.
Correct.
And so as a result of that amortization, the costs, the annual cost will be significantly less than what we would pay in rent.
Okay, I'm just trying to get
Only
an
a
idea
one-story.
why the move. Okay.
And also their lease is up.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the next year.
So what are we gonna do with the
All right.
5,000 square foot building?
Are you experiencing an increase there? or-
TD
I know-
TD
I'm
Bank.
trying to
On
understand
an,
why.
on an
why the
annual,
move.
on an annual basis.
Right across the street. Okay.
Yeah, on an annual basis, the rent increases.
So,
There's a combination of factors that are at play here, and economics is one of them, for sure. But also what's going on in the industry with the digital transformations, teller transactions being, literally radically reduced from what we see year over year. Again, 25% reduction in visits since COVID. So you really can't put your finger on one element to say that's the reason.
Trying to find your hardship. Okay.
Well, it's.
It's not a hard
We're just trying to be smart, sensible players and perform our fiduciary responsibility to our investors is what it boils down to.
And just a couple of things, just to be clear. They're staying in the same neighborhood, they're trying to provide the same service to the members of the community by staying in the same neighborhood across the street. They're reducing their footprint and size, so it's not increasing it. They're actually moving to where their headquarters are. They're with regard to the services, they said they can't modify the building such that it would have the safety needed for the bank, so that another tenant could also be in the bank. And a 35-year-old facility is just not working for them anymore. So it was a combination, as he said, that's why we wanted the testimony, to put it on the record.
Did you consider tearing down the building across the street and rebuilding your building there?
We don't own that.
But you don't own the building right there either, do you?
No, that's correct, but I don't have to tear anything down. That would be a landlord decision. And candidly, what we recently discovered is that, a Starbucks, it seems, I'm told, anecdotally, a Starbucks client is more valuable than a banking client.
Plus there's no downtime.
I have a question, sir. Can you go into a little bit more detail as to the complications with the modification? Because just across the other side of the parking lot, there's a building that's shared with Somerset Valley Urgent Care with another bank right there. So that building has existed with two tenants for years and years. So we'll need to understand a little bit more about what are the complicating factors of having to split that property.
I'm not an engineer either, but that building is significantly larger than 5,000 square feet. And so I have not been in that building, so I can't speak to it, but I can only imagine that they have taken extraordinary security measures in order to separate what I think is the urgent care from the PNC.
Yes.
Yeah. And 5,000 square feet, I think that becomes a little bit more of a challenge.
So this new building that you're proposing, you'll own as well?
We will have a land lease,
A land lease,
a
okay.
land lease, and we will own the building. We will pay to construct the building.
Right.
Madam Chair, if I just could.
Yes.
I don't want to interrupt the presentation. Obviously, they have.
No, go right ahead, Frank, it's fine.
I think one of the things that's important to recognize is item 4.1 in my lately delivered report points out that the FAR requirement in the ordinance is 0.25, 25% basically coverage. What exists there before this application is 0.26, and what will exist when they're done is 0.264. In the realm of how much of a departure from our standard is it, we need to recognize characteristically this is a very small departure. Just so,
This is
you know,
true.
So when we look through whatever lens we're looking through, it's not a use variance. We're not talking about a use they're not supposed to have here. And you have to appreciate, as we heard a minute ago, this consolidation of their operations at this location only fortifies the chance that both parts of that operation will stay here for a long time.
This is true.
But I'll stop there and I'll let them make their
Thank you, Frank. Okay, and yes, go right ahead, Chris.
Only because you made it part of your testimony, really not my thing, but you made a point about your goal is to remain an independent bank. All we've seen in the banking industry for the past 25 years is consolidation, and more consolidation. So we're going to make a permanent improvement or change to that building. 3 years, 5 years, 10 years from now, Bank of America, Chase, whatever, buys you guys and closes the branch in Bedminster like they've already done. This building would not have lend itself to repurposing necessarily. And I'm linking the two statements because your goal is to remain independent, but no one can see into the future. And I'm wondering how someone, and maybe this is a question for your architect, how someone might repurpose this building as banking industry becomes more and more automated, not necessarily by people's habits necessarily, but the way I think the banking industry has driven it to an online solution. The only thing you can't do online now is go to your safety deposit box, right?
Just about.
So, my question is really about how can we repurpose this when and if you do sell the building or you do sell your bank to some larger entity? And then we've got this thing sitting out in the middle of a parking lot that can't be used for anything other than a bank purpose.
We could wait and have the architect address that. He's going to be speaking.
The only thing I would say is that COVID has given us some insights into that and the repurposing of drive-through facilities. So it's not as if there's no data out there on that subject.
All right, well, I'll be interested to hear that testimony.
Good, okay. Anyone else on the board? We'll open it up to the public. Any public? Come.
There are a couple that I'm not sure of. If anyone wants to participate in the meeting, you can raise your hand or unmute yourself and let us know who you are.
No?
Joining us.
Okay, so we'll close it to the public for this witness.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, I'd like to call my next witness, the project architect, engineer, sorry. State your name.
It's Robert Moscello, it's spelled M-O-S-C-H-E-L-L-O, and my business address is 265 Main Street, Gladstone, New Jersey.
Michelle, please raise your right hand. Bob, are you in the meeting room?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
I do.
The reason I asked, Rob, is that you're also on Zoom without a video, so I'm not sure why, but
I'm going to be sharing my screen for the exhibits.
okay, thank you.
So, Madam Chair, I know this witness has appeared before the board previously. Would you like me to go over his experience and qualifications, or do you accept him?
Yes, I don't think that's necessary. Yes, he's here every week.
Almost every week.
I knew he was a familiar face. Thank you.
So I'll get started. Okay, so I have a couple of exhibits for this evening. I have them up here on the PowerPoint, and I'll enter them as I go through for Mr. Collins for the record as well. So first off, we have what is entitled Aerial Exhibit, and it's dated March 10th, 2022, and we'll note that A1 for the record. So I'll use the pointer here on the screen to just describe what we're seeing for the group. So this is the 2020 state aerials, just to kind of give the context of the location of the project. North being up on the map. Route 287 is on the west side, going, of course, in a north-south direction. Then you have Route 202, 206, that's adjacent to the property, also going in a north-south direction. You have the interchange with Hills Drive, the traffic signal where my pointer is here on the plan, and then, of course, Hills Drive comes into the development and further up into the residential. And the property itself in question is lot 11.2, block 59.26. It's 15.99 acres, and it's within your PUD planned unit development zone. And it's outlined in yellow, as you see on my map here. It's known as 500 and 550 Hills Drive, and its main access is off of Hills Drive. There's two main access points. I'll call it a western access point and a eastern access point off of Hills Drive into the property. It's comprised of approximately 180,990 square feet of office space within 2 buildings, basically almost identical structures as you can see on the plan, kind of catty-corner to each other with parking surrounding both those structures. There are 697 parking spaces on the property, 118 of which are below grade within the 2 building structures themselves. And as it was mentioned, the FAR on the property is 0.26, where your zone allows 0.25 in accordance with the PUD zone. There's also a large pond you see on the property to the northwest of the 2 buildings. That pond is an existing stormwater management pond that was built not only as part of this site, but also provides stormwater management for a portion of the Hills development that comes down and drains through this pond and ultimately across into the north branch of the Rowden River under 287. So it's a regional stormwater basin that treats both this site as well as the upland, commercial and residential portions of the Hills development. And then just adjacent to this site is another smaller office building that's has access off of Robertson Drive. And there's actually an emergency access right back here in the corner between those 2 properties as well, which is a secondary emergency access if needed. As was pointed out, this property was the subject of some previous approvals, actually dating back to probably 2010 on this property, that involved both sign variances for signs on both buildings. When Peapack Gladstone Bank came in here, they got some variances for signs on 500 Hills Drive, and then we had done some applications for, at the time, was MPS Pharmaceuticals on 550 Hills Drive. There was an application for removing all of the old metal halide parking lot lights and replacing them all with LEDs, which was done a number of years ago. And then recently, as back as 2016, we were in front of the board to reconfigure the on-site parking and increase the parking spaces from 697 spaces to 894 spaces. And that was primarily done when a lot of landlords were being asked by their tenants or potential tenants to go from what is normally a 4 per 1,000 parking requirement up closer to 5 per 1,000. A lot of times back then tenants were looking to put more people into the buildings, so we were doing a number of applications, this being one of them where we reconfigured the parking, and I'll show you an exhibit of that a little later on, to get up to 894 spaces on the property. None of those improvements have been built yet to date, but as Ms. Berger pointed out, they're still valid and they could be implemented in the future when things change and we start seeing maybe more people back in offices, depending on the tenant makeup and everything else. We may need to still build those, but for right now, we're not proposing to make those changes at this time, but they're still part of the application because we want to keep that approval going forward. In terms of tonight's application, and I'll move on to Exhibit A2, which is entitled Site Plan Rendering, that's also dated March 10th, 2022. Let me actually just go back to A1 for one moment. I want to point out on this map generally where the bank building itself is going, because I'm going to zoom in terms of its location. So basically, as I talked about, there's the western entrance to the 500 Hills Drive property. You come in off of 202, 206, you make that left, you come in the main drive, and if you made a right, there's a landscaped green island right here in the middle. I'll zoom into it, where you see these parking spaces where my pointer is on the map. This is where we're proposing the new building. So I'm going to put a rendering up in a moment of that, but this is the location where the new building is going, just in front of the existing 500 Hills Drive building. So moving on to A2, which is the site plan rendering. So here's that same drive lane coming in off of Hills Drive, which is on the bottom of the plan here. You have the existing building, 500 Hills Drive, and we're proposing the bank building in the middle of that island here. And of course, we have to remove some parking spaces to put it in, but we're proposing that at that location. So just some of the statistics on the building itself, and I'll zoom in to the site here so you can see it. It is a 3,006 square foot overall building. It's 2 levels. It's a first floor level and a basement level. There's no second story above that, so you'll see the elevations. It's not a 2-story above grade structure. It's actually a 1-story structure with a basement. In terms of the overall square footage, that's based on your net habitable floor area. You got 1,507 square feet on the first floor and 1,499 square feet in the basement, which is a 3,006 square foot building which when you do the calculations increases the FAR from 0.26 to 0.264 in terms of the overall number. So it's a 0.004 increase in floor area based on the overall property square footage. The building has two entrances, a main entrance on the western side of the building, and you'll see this in the architecturals as well. The main entrance on the western side, and then there's also a secondary entrance which goes into a vestibule for an internal ATM, as well as some other, I think there's also some secure, I'll say boxes there as well that Mr. Rorty can speak to in terms of the internal operations of the building. So two entrances on the building, internal ATM vestibule, and then we have the drive-through, which is a two-lane drive-through with a canopy that covers the lane closest to the building, and then half covers the second lane on the outside of the secondary drive-through lane. The drive-through lane closest to the building will have an ATM, which will be installed, into the building facade itself. The second drive-through lane will have your typical vacuum tube, canister, video setup for conversing with the teller inside of the building through that second drive-through lane. In terms of overall stacking, you can have at least 6 cars in the overall queue, one at each, one at the ATM, one at the vacuum tube, a car behind each of those, and then at least 1 or 2 additional vehicles in the drive-through lane. Again, given the way banks are operating today, and you'll hear this from a traffic consultant, that should be more than sufficient to handle the daily banking operations of the building. But you'll hear that from our traffic consultant as well. The bank will have it'll be a 24-hour ATM, so it'll be available 24 hours a day, and the lighting for that, and I'll get into the lighting in a little bit, lighting will be on 24 hours as well for security purposes due to the 24-hour ATM at the facility. We also have some sidewalk connectivity between the main entrance and the secondary entrance, and we have 2 ADA spaces, one by the ATM vestibule, and then one by the main entrance as well for access into the building. There's typical striping for crosswalks, stop bars, and traffic control signage to control vehicles when they're done with the ATM or drive-through and want to exit back out into the drive-ins. There will be signage at the entry point into the drive-through as well. I think there was a comment in the engineer's review letter about clearance height for the drive-through. It's actually a 12-foot clearance height, and what we'll do is we'll add some signage by the entryway into the drive-through lane, just so that vehicles know that there's a height limitation there for cars. It's actually, I'll refer to the PNC across the street, they have that. Their drive-through lane goes all the way around the building, and they have signage before you go in. It's the same thing, same maximum height clearance, so we'll do the same thing here to note that as a small directional sign before you come into the drive aisle. In terms of lot coverage, your ordinance allows 65% lot coverage. The existing is 45.1%. With this reconfiguration and removal of some parking spaces and then putting some parking spaces back, we're actually going to be just under 46% lot coverage. The plans say 45.3, but that didn't take into account the parking space that we'll talk about in a moment. So we're just under 46% lot coverage, which is well under your ordinance requirements for this particular zone. And then in terms of parking, the site, as I mentioned previously, actually I didn't mention it yet, the ordinance requirement for the site is going to be 814 parking spaces, and that was based on the existing requirement of, when it's just strictly office, was 804 parking spaces if it was just an office use. And by adding the bank use in, it goes up to 814 required parking spaces. Now the site, as I mentioned, only has 697 spaces. That's the way it was originally constructed when the site was built back in the 80s. So of course the site was underparked, but it's always functioned as that in that way since it was constructed. But the ordinance requirement says we need 814 parking spaces, and we are going to be removing some spaces around the building to construct the building and the drive-through. So what we're proposing to do, and I'm going to put up my next exhibit, the exhibit A3 for the record. This is entitled Approved Parking Construction Exhibit. And this is actually dated March 10th, 2022. This is a rendering of the site, and what you're seeing here is the reconfigured parking areas for redesigning the site to get to what was the original 897 spaces that I talked about earlier on. So we were reconfiguring all the parking, adding additional parking in the, I'll say the northeastern parking fields, and then widening out some of the parking in the southern parking area, and then adding a whole parking facility just to the north of 500 Hills Drive to get up to that 897 parking space.
So your plan is to add more impervious coverage to get to that?
Well, this plan would add up to 50, I think it was 55% lot coverage to get, if you were to build all 897 spaces.
Okay.
The plan to,
What
the
your
plan,
plan is to do?
no,
This
this
was approved.
Oh, okay.
this was approved already. This was approved back in 2016. This was the full build out if we were to build 897. We don't need to build 897 right now. All we're looking to do is put back the spaces we're losing to building the bank building right now, to stay equal with that 697 that's on the plan right
So just
now.
state again for the record, how many spaces are we losing by building the bank building, and how many are you putting in?
Right. So we're actually losing 23 spaces by putting in the bank building, but I'm reconfiguring it, so I have to put back 19 additional spaces to meet that same number, because I'm getting some spaces back around the building itself.
Okay, because we received testimony prior that there's only, what, 265 people in that building currently?
No,
That's the one building.
In the
their
bank.
space,
In
their
their space.
majority.
And their space, the building's about 90,000 square feet, they have about 80,000 square feet of it. So that they have most of the occupation of 500 Hills Drive
Okay.
is the
Because, you know,
bank.
it's never.
There's another
I would hate
tenant
to
in
see-
500, and there's 550 also.
Okay.
So the
it's not
800
just
covers both
spaces.
buildings, Rob?
Excuse me?
The 800 number, or the approved, was to cover both buildings.
Correct.
The 897 was to cover both buildings at an almost 5 per thousand rate. It just fell short of that when we went and got that approved back in 2016. So all we're looking to do with this application is, so we don't have any net loss in parking spaces, stay with that 697. We're going to put 19 spaces back, and as you see on the plan here, I kind of highlighted them with a blue outline, putting back 6 spaces over here, or constructing 6 spaces in this area right here. This is where the building's going, by the way. 1 space over here in this location, 3 spaces in an island that's over here closer to 202, 206, and then 9 spaces in the front over here.
So what's there now? Is it just grass?
It's just grass, yeah.
Do we have to have that done? I mean, can we, is that something, am I out of line? I mean.
No, I was going to ask the
do we
same thing.
really
Is there a need
want
for
all those
that?
extra
Yes,
parking?
yes, the witness.
So is the question, are you doing it because you want to make it even or because you really need them?
I think from our perspective, we were doing it to keep it even, so there's no net loss in parking.
Right, but if the board said,
But if
don't
we
worry
did not
about that.
require it, yeah.
Right, if the board felt that we can not have to build those 19 spaces, I think our traffic engineer could confirm that that's not going to change the overall operation of the property.
So then you wouldn't have to put the parking spaces so much closer to the property line in that particular.
You're not prepared to do the 800 anymore, correct?
No, not right now. We're keeping that, we're still keeping that approval because, again, given tenant makeup.
So
and
your plan is
how the future
basically
goes
net
on.
zero from what you have today?
Correct,
Correct.
correct.
Okay,
We don't wanna lose any
not any
spaces.
more spaces, just replace the spots that you're losing because you're building the building?
Correct.
Yeah, and you're doing that just because that's what you're losing, you want to be fair, but
Correct.
we can,
No, Tim's right, if the whole point is you could lose 23 spaces and it wouldn't matter because the traffic guy's going to tell us they're not needed,
He's only
the
the
board might
tenant.
decide you don't go put all those.
He's only the tenant, not the landlord.
Right.
They have that discretion, put it that way.
But he's only the tenant, not the landlord.
He's making the arrangements to make these
So-
improvements, right?
We just have,
It's my understanding that our traffic expert who's here today will testify that they're doing it to make it come back to the same number, and the property would function without adding them back.
so that's
in.
something we can
So
discuss.
Okay.
it's possible that the board could do something like I've seen in other towns where they approve it, but they say you don't have to put it in unless your experts of the board or the town determines it's needed.
Banks.
Like bank it, I call it.
Right,
so to
right.
speak.
Let's hear from your traffic.
Yeah.
Let's hear from your traffic expert. We can make that decision.
Just a quick question, Rob. At 697, what's that parking ratio?
it was like
3.5?
3.7 or some, just.
2.7?
No, 3.7, 3.8, just.
3.7.
It was just under 4,
Just under 4.
yeah.
Okay.
Just to further clear up or hopefully not complicate this, but of the 19 spaces that you're initially proposing to put back, how many are sort of infill spaces and how many are footprint expansion?
These three are infill. That one's really a footprint expansion. I guess I would call these infill along the front here, because you kind of had the parking along there.
I think those are on the perimeter, those might be a footprint expansion, right? You're taking out the grass there, so discounting the islands, you get, what do you got in the front corner there, 9?
9.
9, so you have 9 footprint expansion plus the 6.
Plus the
on
6 is
there.
a footprint expansion on the
So
other side.
15 of the 19 would be a footprint expansion and 4 would be infill.
Right.
Roughly, yeah, that's correct.
That's a good point.
And this plan is a little misleading to me, Rob, because you have the existing parking in the light gray,
Correct.
right? And then you have the expansion to get to 800 in the darker color, which do not exist today.
Correct.
Right, but there's existing parking underneath that. Like if you
Yeah,
look
yeah,
here,
yeah.
you can see the parking outline
So-
that's underneath there.
So you're not making all this, this, expanding this massive parking.
Correct.
I think that's what's misleading.
We are, on this plan, we are expanding
It's
out
the blue
to
ones.
certain areas.
It's the blue ones.
Right, like this area back here, this is the edge of the parking lot, if you can see that on the image. I'm going to zoom in here. Here's the edge of the parking lot, right here, and this was an expansion where we were building over grass.
Pre-approved.
Okay, and there was also a bump behind the building too, we were pushing it out. We were adding impervious coverage with this plan beyond the limits of the existing parking lot that was there. This is the only way we could get to the 897. It wasn't just within the footprint of the existing parking.
897 is,
Right.
all right, that's massive, understood.
Right.
That was from a different time.
Yeah, that's why we were only trying to do it in the front and the
Until next week.
infill,
Yeah.
not to go into that area at all.
So you, of the 897 plan, you sort of cherry picked 19 spaces within that and said, okay, we gotta get to net zero for this application.
And those were the least obtrusive of all the spaces, where we could just add them right into areas that are green right up against the parking lot and not have to regrade anything major
You
to make that
weren't
work.
changing that plan, though, you were just sort of
Right.
picking isolated
Correct.
areas,
Correct.
saying, here's a few that we could add.
Since we already had it designed, and we can go back to what we had already designed and approved, that's the way we looked at it.
But it sounds like if the board is not inclined to need them put in, your ghost space or bank space idea could make a lot of sense, and you would be in favor of that, you'd be asking for that, right?
Correct.
Just so we're all clear.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, we would also look
Less
at
expense.
if we have the option of being able to build it in the future if we need it.
Right.
Right.
Correct.
But right now, we would prefer, if we don't have to, we'd rather leave it out for now.
I think the board and everyone would rather have more green space if we could maintain it.
As long as you can keep it there, right?
Correct.
So in a sense, if you're not relinquishing your approval for the 894, essentially all those spaces are bank at this point.
Correct.
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 That's correct.
Or to put another way, what Mark is saying is, you don't need to find places for even more bank spaces to make up for these lost spaces, because
They're
there's
already
way
there.
more than you're ever going to need
They're already
already in
there.
the approved plan.
Right.
Good idea.
Okay, thank you.
So, that being said about parking and the banking, I'm just going to touch briefly on utilities for the building. I'll go back to Exhibit A2, just for the record. It'll
Just, excuse me, before we move there, just so we're clear on the parking, you are restriping or reconstructing a few parking spots in order to comply with handicap code and things like that.
Yes,
So,
we're adding 2
just
handicap
right around the
spaces.
building, there are a few spaces and things that are
Right.
required. I think it's 4 or 6 or whatever.
We're restriping some spaces on the west side of the building to get a handicap space in there, and we're adding a new space for handicap on the east side of the
I just want to be clear, so, we say we are changing some over there because you need to comply with code requirements.
And how many charging stations are we putting in?
There were none proposed on the plan right now, but when we did this, that issue, I think, that has to be addressed under statute, so.
Okay.
We'll talk with the bank about that. Before the evening's over, I'll get an answer on charging stations. So in terms of utilities, the building itself is going to be serviced by all public utilities, public sewers on the property, public water, gas, electric, telecom, so that's all shown on the plans. In terms of stormwater management, the site has an existing pond on it already. We are proposing a water quality device just to address the new impervious that's being added for the drive-through lane, and that's shown on the plans as well, to comply with the stormwater requirements. Everything else is being managed by the large pond that you saw, that I pointed out on the property, previously. We do have to make a slight modification to its outlet structure, which we'll do as part of this application. In terms of landscaping and lighting, I'm going to go to Exhibit A4.
Rob, real
Yeah.
quick, if you don't have the calculation, it's totally fine. How much impervious coverage are you adding? Like net?
So if we
increase?
just forget the 19 parking spaces.
Yeah,
for a
let's
minute,
not
and
talk
go
about
to
just the
bank
building.
itself. So basically, what we're adding a total of, do the math, but we're going from 313,893 square feet of impervious to 315,339 square feet. So it's basically about 1,400 square feet of impervious coverage that's being added to the plant.
On a 15-acre lot.
On 15, yeah, so
You're
it's going
still
from,
not approaching 50% lot.
right, it's going from 45.1 to 45.3% lot coverage.
Almost a 16-acre lot, 15.99.
Right. So, yeah. Basically, the increase in impervious coverage is the building footprint, plus or minus 200 square feet, because we're taking out parking to create the drive-through lane, so you're basically awash on pavement.
Yep.
In terms of what we're doing here. And just in terms of landscaping, real simple on that, we are proposing a couple of shade trees. You can see them on the plan here, these circle trees, 3 or 4 shade trees around the building. And then we're proposing 2 additional shade trees on Hills Drive. We are taking out 4 evergreen trees that are closest to the intersection. They've kind of grown into each other, so we're going to take those down and add 2 shade trees along Hills Drive to keep that row of trees along there. And then we are proposing landscaping around the foundation of the building and everything. You see both by the drive-through and in the front here, in ground cover for the landscaping. And then in terms of lighting, since this is a bank, it's a financial institution, there's an ATM, it's open, the ATM is available 24 hours a day. There are state standards for lighting around ATMs. I'm sure you've heard these before when the other banks have come to town. We have to comply with those standards for security purposes. Just to reiterate them again for the record, because it does trigger some design waivers, which I'll touch on before I finish up my testimony. But we have basically 4 pole-mounted lights, one here, basically in the 4 corners of the site that are going to illuminate the parking areas and the drive-through lanes around the building. And there's also going to be 6 canopy-mounted lights. They're denoted as these Cs here on the plan underneath the canopy of the ATM and drive-through. And there's also going to be a canopy light under the porch on the main entrance, and also a canopy light under the porch on the ATM vestibule entrance as well. So,
Could you just tell the board how far this is back from the street, so when they talk about lights, you understand how far back it is?
yeah, the building's about between 80 and 90 feet from Hills Drive itself, if you want to measure it from the curb line to building itself. It's 78 feet from the corner to the right-of-way line. So it's over 100 feet back from the road. And most of the lighting, the higher lighting levels, will be behind the building, between the new building and the existing building. And then we have a secondary lighting I'll talk about as well. So in accordance with the state standards, you have to have a minimum of 10-foot candles within 2 feet at the face of the ATM, which is going to be the drive-up ATM at the building here. So that has to be 10-foot candles within 2 feet of that. And then you need to have 2-foot candles within 50 feet of that ATM. There's a 50-foot circle. That's why we have the canopy lighting to illuminate that area to meet that 2-foot candle requirement. Your ordinance is actually 1-foot candle average, and they want a minimum of 2-foot candles within 50 feet. And then if we have an ATM vestibule, the state requires another minimum 2-foot candle within 60 feet of that ATM vestibule and the closest defined parking area, which happens to be the ADA space. So between those 2 requirements, the lighting levels around the building are actually higher than your ordinance allows. It's actually an average of approximately 4-foot candles, actually an average of 1.6-foot candles, and a maximum of about 18.6 underneath the canopy to meet those standards that the state requires.
The foot candle measurement is at the ground, Ron?
It's measured at the ground level, yeah.
So 6 feet off the ground, it's 20-foot.
It could be, it'll be brighter as you get closer to the source, correct?
And Rob, can you tell us how close the closest resident is to that? Can you?
Resident, if I go back to Exhibit A1, the closest residential structure would be on the other side of Hills Drive. This building that I'm circling here with my pointer and just roughly, just give me a second. It's probably about 800 feet away from the building in terms of its distance, and there's landscaping and vegetation between there. It's actually closer to the existing bank branch that's on the plan here. This is the branch where the PG Bank is currently located right now, and the residential structure is a lot closer to that one than it will be to this building further away.
I have a question for you. I'm sorry. If the existing branch at the Hills parking, at the Hills Shopping Center is vacated by the bank, does the bank right now that's there have those same state requirements for lighting? And if that existing bank is vacated and becomes something else, a Starbucks or something else, then we can actually reduce the foot candle around that building.
In theory, you could, correct?
Yes.
I would assume that if the bank, since they're there now, when they put, whatever they put in would have to meet the standard for lighting.
Right.
You know, so it's probably been there for a number of years already. But yes, if it were to change, you can modify the lighting levels that are at that structure.
Thank you.
So, to be clear, the existing bank that's there has that amount of light at this point that you're proposing for the new one?
I can't say that because I haven't studied the
It doesn't
lighting
look
that's there.
light.
Yeah, I haven't looked at that lighting at that bank facility.
Okay.
But what we're testifying to is the current state requirements.
I get that. I'm trying to
And-
compare.
We don't want to mislead you and tell you we measured at the other bank, but this is what the current state requirements are. And I would assume that that bank has the same, but we couldn't testify to that.
Yeah.
Robert, these all of these will come up.
Yes, LED light is in the, they're gonna match the existing colonial style lights that are out there, which have the light source in the top of the picture, and they shine out, so it's full color off lights. And the ones under the canopy, of course, are high hats, so they're gonna shine down as well. So that's the lighting standards, and they are design waivers. I'll just touch on the design waivers again when I go through that, when I get to that point. But that's generally the proposed building and the environs around it. I want to take a few minutes to just go through the list of variances and design waivers that we're asking for this evening, and you'll hear some more testimony from our architect and traffic engineer and our planner on those as well. So we'll start off with the first one, which is the variance of floor area ratio. It's from section 13-411.E.3.A, and this is where the floor area ratio 0.25 is your maximum permitted per your ordinance, and we're asking for 0.0264 for this application this evening. It's an increase of 0.004 over the existing FAR that's been on the property since these buildings were constructed. The second variance that we're asking for is basically a parking variance, and that's from section 13-401.2.d. And this is where 814 parking spaces would be required, which is a combination of both office and the bank use. And we're going to propose that same 697, now subject to whether or not the board wishes to reduce that by another 19 spaces, which if we did that, it would go to 678.
And we would bank the 19.
And we would bank the 19.
As we banked the other plan.
Rob, this is Tom Collins now.
It's clear for the record,
678.
678.
Rob, this is Tom Collins now.
Yeah, Tom.
Are you actually certain that let's say you count the spaces required for the bank and for the existing building, for the existing ordinance, are you sure that that number remains 697, which is your current number, or doesn't it go up somewhat for the bank? As you said, a bank requires 10 more on another count that you did.
No, I guess what I was saying, Tom, was the existing office use requires 804 spaces. And then when we add the bank building in, that's another 10 spaces for a requirement of 814. The existing on-site today, if we don't do anything, was 697. So we were going to put back up to 697 by building 19 additional spaces in those areas that I pointed out previously. So if we don't build the 19, we'd be down at 678.
Right, okay, but you're banking all the remaining, so theoretically, you comply with the increased number as well for what you're banking, by what you're banking. So isn't the waiver from the current ordinance is what I'm getting at?
The variance is from the current ordinance, correct?
Right, and the current ordinance would say it'd be more, the 810, I guess, that you mentioned before, some number that is very high, but you're going to bank everything from 678 up to that required number, and you're going to bank more that you would like to keep.
Correct. We're actually going to bank from 678 up to I think it was 897, which is what we could build the site out to if we built everything, which is in excess of the 814.
Before you put back any of the new spaces you would have swapped in now
Correct.
for the changes.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, so why don't you do a chart? Your current plans probably show a chart that assumes you're building those 19 that we're replacing the 23, and you're adjusting the numbers and dealing with that. Why don't you do an updated chart that we could use for the resolution that says, you know, if you waive the present implementation of the requirements beyond 678, the required number would be this, and then the allowed bank spaces is, I forget, 897, so that in the future, somebody looking at it can realize if the township engineer says build this many more, you'll do that, and if the applicant says we want to build the 19 more, we'll do that. And if they want to build more, either party wants to require more, then that can be required from the 897.
That we got the original approval on. Yeah, I can put that chart together. That won't be a problem.
I think that's a good idea. That'll be straight for the record, and everyone will have the numbers, and it could include, if the board determines to.
Yeah, let's hear from our traffic expert, so we can determine that for sure.
So
let me just keep going with the variances. So that was the parking variance from 13401.2.d. Then the next one is going to be the sign variances. And I'm just going to go through these and point them out, and then our architect will talk about the signage as well. And I'm going to use his architectural plans that were submitted by F.J. Rawding, and this was the set that was submitted to the board, and it's sheet A02, dated October 22nd, 2021. And this is the sheet 2 in the set, and this has the building elevations and signage on it. It's a color rendering.
Yeah.
Have it up here as well. So there are a series of signs that we're proposing for this application. It's actually 12 signs in total. So I'm just going to point out the signs first and identify them, and then I'll go through and just touch on the variances. So starting with, I'll go with the main identification signs first. There's 3 of those. There's the main PPAC Gladstone Bank name sign itself that's on the facade of the building. That's shown here on the elevation, shown on the west elevation. Then there's a metal logo sign that's below that, below that identification sign that's also shown on the building here, and that's 23 square feet. So that the main lettering is 19.6 square feet. The logo sign's 23 square feet. They're both on the west elevation. Then on the
Rob, where does that face? That face
the west
Hills Drive,
elevation
or does it face 206?
That faces Hills Drive.
Okay.
I just want to confirm that before I... Yes, it faces Hills Drive. It's the west elevation.
It's on the top
corner right here.
west elevation.
This is what you see facing Hills Drive.
Yeah, okay.
And then on the, we'll call
The
the
south elevation.
north elevation, which is the entrance that's on the side of the building where the ADA space, the main ADA space is, that faces the entry drive coming in. We have PPAC Gladstone Bank above that those entry doors, and that's a 6.12 square foot sign that's above the entry doors there. So those are the 3 main identification signs identifying the bank. Then we have on the doors themselves, there's the 4 doors that you enter into the building. We have a glass-mounted translucent sign That's 4 square foot each. They're 2 by 2 in size. On the ATM vestibule doors and on the main entry doors into the building. So there's 4 of those.
We weren't sure if that was considered a sign or not, but we are calling it a sign because we weren't sure if it was, but we wanted to just be clear, we didn't want to not present that to the board. It's intended to have that on the door.
And they're 4 square feet each.
Is that decal on the inside of the door or are they outside the door?
I think the architect will have to answer that one, as to how it's affixed to the door.
Okay.
And then on top of the ATM vestibule door, there's also a 24-hour banking sign that's 4.5 square feet in size. That's above that door as well. That identifies the banking on that side of the building. And then lastly, we have on the drive-through canopy, you've got the typical clearance sign. That's 2.9 square feet. You have the open/closed signs, which say when if the lane's open or closed, and then an ATM night drop sign next for the ATM for the night drop and the ATM on the building itself. So those 4 signs are on the canopy when you drive towards the canopy coming through the drive-through lane. And they vary in size from 2.9 square foot to 1.6 square foot.
And with regard to the signs on the building that identify the name of the bank, could you just tell the board what those signs are made of and how if they're illuminated or non-illuminated?
Yes, so the illuminated signs, I was going to go through the list of the illuminations on the signs, but on the main building on the west elevation and on the, I'll say the north elevation, the signage is illuminated with a light above the sign that's going to illuminate. It's not uplit, it's going to be downlit, and the architect talked a little more detail about how that's done on the PPAC Gladstone Bank, on the metal sign, on the 24-hour banking, and on the PPAC Gladstone Bank above the double door. So those will be illuminated, but they'll be illuminated from the top down. And then the signs on the drive-through will also be internally illuminated to light up the ATM night drop open language on those signs. They're internally illuminated to light those up.
And could you just take the board back to where you would go into the drive-through and see those signs on your site plan?
So when you come in the drive lane here, they'd be on this side, this facade of the drive-through. On the canopy, on the canopy. Where my pointer is here.
And when we talked about the ATM doors?
They're on the east facade where my pointer is here, and then the main doors are over here where you have the PPAC Gladstone Bank on top of there, and the 24-hour banking on top of the ATM doors. And then this is the facade with the main logo sign and the PPAC Gladstone Bank on this facade here.
That round logo?
Correct.
Just wanted to make sure everyone knew exactly what.
And then you're adding some directional signs, correct?
Correct, there'll be directional signs at the drive-through, stop sign when you exit out of the drive-through, and a stop sign at the stop bar here as well.
How big are the directional signs?
They'll be standard MUTCD signage, in terms of stop sign and that kind of stuff. The sign for the clearance going into the drive-through, it'll probably be smaller. We'll have to design it, but it'll be on a pole mount.
But you're not proposing like entrance, little blocks of entrance on there, like that, to the drive?
No, we won't.
So the only one you want to clear?
Yeah, clearance there, yeah.
All right, that's fine.
There's no current plan for a pylon sign on Hills Drive or at any of the entrances?
No, the only signs will be on the building.
Is there 2 ATMs here?
There is 2. There's the one at the drive-through, and there's the one inside the vestibule.
That's what I'm picking up, okay. I didn't,
If someone wanted to walk in, they could use the internal ATM.
yeah, inside, and inside.
Yeah, one inside and one in the drive-through.
That's where it says 24-hour banking, that's right.
Yeah, so that's the
Right.
entrance, and then the night drop and the ATM inside that space.
Plan shows 3 inside, right?
Yeah. 3.
Well, we can go with the architect with that.
And then start to talk
Architect.
about
Clarify.
inside.
Yeah, we can go with the architect on that. Rob, can you tell me how many square feet, besides things for like the drive-through, how much square footage is actually total?
Right, so
Okay.
I have all that. So including the signs on the drive-through canopy themselves.
Yes,
The total square footage of all the signs
yes.
is 82 square feet.
And what is allowed?
Your ordinance only allows 22 square foot max for one building mounted sign.
How much is the logo? the seal, the green seal.
Which one, hold on a second.
The round one that goes on the front of the building.
This one right here?
Yeah.
That is 23 square feet.
So that's basically a little bit more than what's actually permitted.
Correct.
Correct.
It was 22, that one's 23. And then the square foot of the P-PAC Gladstone Bank name itself is 19.6. I rounded it to 20 square feet in terms of the second largest sign that's on the building.
And can you remind me again how that's going to be lit? It's going to be lit from the top down?
So there's going to be there's going to be a light that's going to light it from the top down. I think the architect could probably explain it in a little more detail how they're going to do that with the LED lighting on the signs. Instead of uplighting it, it'll be down.
But currently our ordinance is from the bottom up.
I think currently the ordinance doesn't permit uplighting.
Uplight. No, it's down.
It requires downlight.
Downlight, okay.
Yeah. And we noted originally on the plans, it did note as uplighting, and we realized that, and I'm correcting that this evening to say it'll be downlit in accordance with what your ordinance requires.
Okay. Thank you.
So I have a question for our professionals, right? We're talking about directional signs. Some of this signage doesn't strike me as traditional signage, right? Like the clearance heights and right, whether the lanes are open or closed. Do we make a distinction? Like, how do we define signage?
Well, anything building mounted on the canopy, it would provide either information as to, identification of what it is, utilization of the lanes. I would refer to all of that as, some of it's directional in nature, but it's all descriptive. That would all fall in my view under just standard building signage to help with the function of the building. Signage that relates to the circulation and the traffic control on the site itself. They've testified as all MUTCD compliance, that would be like your standard street signs, maybe with the exception of the one advanced clearance sign might be, let's say, somewhat custom, but would still be designed like a traditional street sign or traditional MUTCD sign. So I don't know that I would take any of the signs on the building and sort of categorize them into the site circulation category. I would leave them all as just site labeling. It's just because the canopy itself is a functional component of the building, you need some sort of information on that canopy to explain how that portion of the building functions. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Just for the record, if you took those out, they total 12 square feet when you round them off, so it'd go from
So we're still
82 down to 70 square feet.
Okay.
But in the sense that we look at them the same way, that we treat them as part of square footage for signage on the buildings.
And we've also included in the signage calculation of that 80, whatever the number was. 82, those logos on the door.
Yes, those are counted as well.
You counted that in the 82?
We
Yes.
did, yes.
Square feet?
Yes,
Yes.
we did.
And you said they were 4 feet each?
4 square feet apiece,
Yeah,
2 by 2.
2 by 2.
yeah, 2 by 2.
Are they opaque or translucent?
They're opaque.
Is the letter height on the 24-hour banking, is that the same as the P-PAC letter height, or is that a little bit smaller?
It's a little bit smaller. It's 9 inches.
The cap is 9 versus 12?
And the P-PAC Gladstone Bank is 12 inches high. So it is slightly smaller, yeah. The H is 9 versus the P, which is a foot.
Why have that on there? What's the intention? So people on the road can see that and driving by?
I'll defer that to the architect, but I believe it's a requirement for banking. Just like pharmacies on supermarkets, I think it's a requirement by the state to have that labeling on there. But I'll defer that to the architect.
Okay, anyone else on the board for signage? No. Janine, did anybody join us?
One last question for Rob.
Yeah.
Because it's a site planning thing. Why this location, I know there's some traffic implications for sure, why this location in the parking lot? Seems a little random to me.
I second that.
Good question. So we looked at a couple different areas on this property for locating. I'll go back to Exhibit A1, which is the aerial. And when it came down to basically 2 things. One was close proximity to the main entrance of 500 Hills Drive, because there will be some symmetry, or in terms, I shouldn't say symmetry, some synergy, thank you, between some services that are offered in that building for clientele, and then when the clients are done in the main building, they may want to do some of their personal banking, in which case they can walk across the street or drive, or walk across the street to this bank, to this building and do their banking there, which they can't do in the main building. It's not set up for tele-use or anything like that. The other thing is, in looking at the site, most of the other areas, you have very small landscaped islands, basically strips between the parking. We happen to have a larger area of green in here that we were able to fit the building, and by eliminating those parking spaces, we were able to locate it in such a way that it didn't have that much of an impact to the overall site circulation or the parking that's on the property right now. So that's why we chose this space and its close proximity to the front door. If we put it on this side, we would take up a lot more parking and have more impact to the overall site circulation if we did that, as opposed to here. So
But it's so
that's what
massive,
looked
the
at.
parking lot's so massive, it would be kind of, you're taking up prime parking now for the people that are in that building. I mean, the parking, I drive by up and down every day, that road. So, I mean, down in the lower corner was just like abandoned, it's like a no man's land there. I was assuming it was gonna go, keep going left.
Down
Yeah.
here.
On the corner, kind of like.
We were talking about lighting and all this other stuff we wouldn't be seeing.
Yeah, but if you're down there by the corner, you're much further away from the main entrance to the building, and
Yes.
again, that's where they want the connectivity from their clientele. They can go to the bank
But
building.
there's visibility there, though.
Yeah.
People will see that the bank is there if they're
I
coming
mean,
off
there is
the
some
highway.
visibility, but we feel that once you come in Hills Drive, you're gonna see the building once you get to that intersection, and you'll see the signage on the building.
Oh, yeah, you definitely
And
will.
it'll still
That's why
function
I was thinking.
as we intended. Yeah.
And looking at this again, how many trees are you going to be taking down?
We're taking down, there's actually three, I have the number right here. There's a few landscape trees in those islands that we're taking down. I think there's 6 of them in this island here that we're taking down. And then there's 4 evergreen trees that are on the front here that we're taking down. They're grouped right here. There's actually 2 of them growing into each other, into 2 other ones. So we're taking down 10 total trees.
And putting up how many?
I'm sorry.
And then putting up how many?
I believe I said it was 6. Let me just double check. We're taking down 10, and we're putting up 6 proposed trees,
Plus your shrubbery.
plus probably over 40 shrubs.
So the location is basically just so it would be easier to walk back and forth.
It's connectivity to the main building, correct?
And
It's also-
minimizing the number of parking spots you're taking away.
And impact the circulation and parking as well, because we can locate it here and not affect the drive lanes of other parking areas by doing that.
Also, the location of the bank branch is kind of conducive to where it was before on the other branch. So people who were in the shopping center could cross over. It's easier crossing over there. It's easier for them to get to. That's where people walk to and they know. So it's easier, other than putting it in a corner, it's much further away from the people who are used to using it, who were like going to King's and just running across to use the bank, so.
Would it be fair to say also that, banks are typically sort of what they call pass-by use, right? That if you were to put the buildings somewhere else in the parking lot, you have a lot more recirculation through the parking lot.
Well, that was the other thing too. If we put it here in the front of the site, they'd have to drive all the way through the parking lot to get there. They can come in, wrap around. If I go to the site plan rendering A1, you come in the main drive, you wrap in, you come out, and then you go right back out again, back down to the intersection. Then you can go right across into the King Shopping Center.
So you're in that without circulating through the entire parking lot.
Right, you're not going driving through all the drive lanes.
To that point, was any consideration given to putting it right off the double drive?
We
To like
looked
hang
at that.
hang a right or a left off the double drive?
We looked at that and we felt it was better not to put an entry-exit along the double drive itself. And we actually, when we did the original plans for the parking expansion, we were cognizant of not putting entries and exits on the double drives. Bring them into the site, get them to the T intersection, and then let them spin off left
To
to right.
eliminate any possible risk of overflow
It
into the
just
double
reduces
drive?
traffic impacts along there
Yeah,
and from
okay.
interactions with vehicles. And that was actually part of the original testimony back in 2016 on the parking configuration, the way we did it that way. So-
That'd be a little short distance there for a quick turn. You might have a conflict there.
The other question I have, Rob, is, I don't want to say it's shoehorned in there, I don't mean to imply what that sounds like. Back in the day when we used to approve drive-through banks, there was always an escape lane, there was always dozens of stacking. How many cars can stack here?
We can get 6 cars in there before, one at each, one at the ATM, one at I'll say the vacuum tube, and then a car behind each of those, and then you can get 2 more behind that. So you can get 6 in this configuration here, which is, based on today's banking standards, it seems that's more than adequate.
2 aisles of 3.
2 aisles of
Well, you get 1 and 1, you get 1 car, you get 2 and 2, and then you get a single and a single.
Oh, okay.
So if you got 2 cars at each drive-through, and then 2 singles after
So
that.
where it narrows, you'd only have space for 1 car.
Excuse me?
From where it narrows by.
Yes, you have space for 1 car here, 16 foot wide.
16 feet.
Yeah, 16 foot wide.
So unlike the Bank of America, which probably most people are familiar with, which has 3 drive-through lanes and a lot of stacking room and a bypass lane, that's yesterday's model, right?
Correct.
And what you're talking about today, is we're not going to end up with cars that are overstacking and blocking the aisle.
Right. You go back to, and I go back to this, when everyone got paid on a Friday afternoon, and they all ran to the bank, and you're all waiting to cash your checks. Now everything's direct deposit. So, we're not doing that anymore.
No.
So,
I was going to say, what's in check?
correct, so that's
Paying
not
my bills online, yeah.
And the fact that you're kind of in a central island here, and you're almost visible from 360 degrees here, main drive, I was almost functioning as a bypass, right?
Right, and you're not going to pull into that ATM lane unless you know you're going there at this point. Even when you get to the bank itself, you still have to go around to get to the drive-through, so you're going to know you're going down the lane. It's not an exit.
Now, the one against the building has both a deal drawer and an ATM?
Has a what?
The first lane has both a deal drawer and an ATM? Like a...
Architect.
Right.
Yeah.
Is that an architect question? Okay. What I'm saying is it's both an ATM and a teller.
Yes,
Okay.
And then the second one has
Yeah.
a vacuum tube, just
okay.
for the teller, correct.
So the only reason I'm mentioning that is if there's somebody that wants to use the ATM, is it possible that they might get blocked out from doing so by a long stack if they're squeezing together, you know what I'm saying?
They could, but that's why we have a secondary ATM in the building if they don't want to
Okay.
save their car.
They can
If there
get
was
out and use
If there
the
was a
one.
line, and you want to use the ATM, you can park and walk
Okay.
in. Like, make down, you see that in the cars.
Okay, anybody else for Rob? No?
I think you said this already. The parking for the bank is segregated from the parking for the building?
No. I mean, this
All right,
is
so
just,
if I'm a bank customer and I come in after the building's loaded in the morning, where do I park?
I don't think we haven't had that problem where the building's been loaded, but I guess.
Not in the last 2 years anyway, but
Right. If it
we
becomes.
can dream, can't we?
If it becomes a problem, I'm sure the bank could work out maybe signing 2 or 3 spaces or 4 spaces that would be for 15-minute parking for banking business. If it comes to that, I don't think we're going to have to worry about that here, but if it does. And again, too, the bank can control where their employees park as well, so they can ask their employees to park away from the bank, don't leave some spaces open. So the first people in the morning don't all park in this row of parking right here and take those spaces away from the people that are going to use the bank.
And just to remind everyone, there's parking under the building, for building employees as well.
For the execs, you mean?
Employees. Okay, I think we're done. I think we'll just take 5 minutes, and then we'll come back with our architects. How's that?
That's perfect.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we're back online.
Frank Jeff Rawding, R-A-W-D-I-N-G, 141 Morris Street, Morristown, New Jersey.
And could you tell the board your qualifications and experience? I'm not sure if you testified before this board before.
Last week.
It was.
Do you need me to do so, or?
Well, he's just going to
Rording, you have to be sworn. Mrs. Rording, please wait. Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
I do.
Thank you. And the board already recognizes and accepts the qualifications of Mr. Roding, particularly last week. So please go ahead.
I appreciate the board talking to me.
There you go.
I forget, did we enter this exhibit, the floor plans?
They're already part of the record.
Okay, do we want to give it a number, or?
No, you don't need another number unless you changed it or have colored them some differently.
No, this is what should be in your packet. I'm going to keep my direct pretty succinct so we can get through this and then open it up for questions. But what you're looking at here is the floor plans. Our drawing A01 in the left-hand side here, I'm going to show you, is the first floor. If to orient you, Hills Drive is at the bottom of the page here, and then the boulevard coming into the main 500 Hills is off to the left here. The drive-through at the top of the sheet. So the main entrance to the building is a set of double doors here you see in the center, through which you'll go into a closed vestibule, second set of doors, and then you're into the primary portion of the bank. Left and right of those doors, we have a manager's office on the left-hand side, and then we have what we call a platform area, which is really the associates who deal directly with the clients on as they come through the door. You'll notice there's a big open area in the center here. There's other soft seating and the like that we plan on putting in here. We have a teller line up to the left. There's essentially room for 3 tellers there. The teller line also will service the drive-through through the window at the top of the sheet in the center here. And as we stated before, there's 2 drive-throughs immediately to the top of the sheet. There's a little interior workspace which is behind the tellers, which services the access to both the ATM and the night drop. I'll show you on the elevations how and what that looks like. And then there's a small coffee area that you see the circle in, just indicating that that's accessible, handicap accessible. And then, as we said before, this is a 2-story space in that we have a first floor and a basement level. And for accessibility, we actually have an elevator taking us down to the basement here on the lower portion of the sheet. And then the area to the lower right is what we're calling the 24-hour space. Essentially, it's a lockable access 24 hours a day. It will have we're showing multiple ATMs in there. We will have an ATM in there, most likely not multiple ATMs, but it will have an ATM in there. And it's meant for bank customers only, totally secure, 1 person access at a time, and it's locked up at night. So it's not something that will be a through passage. Is going to be like a small vestibule that'll be accessible from inside the bank, but it's not meant as an access to the bank during banking hours.
So you're showing 3 ATMs there? There would only be
Yeah, that's an error. There's not going to be 3 there. There's going to be 1 there, but probably be other machines. That they make new machines now. They're smaller units that we're going to be looking at. This, I also should step back. You mentioned, and I'm going to go back to your question about what this could become. One of the big things that the bank has us doing is looking at this as a state-of-the-art facility. So, as with any other industry, there's a lot of new equipment and stuff coming out. This is going to have all of the most modern equipment you can possibly have in a bank technologically. And I believe that the likelihood of ever changing from a drive-through bank is slim because of that. Even if a Chase came in, this will be top-of-the-line equipment in here. I think they would probably utilize this before they utilize an older branch somewhere else they might have. But that said, it also could potentially, morph into some kind of small office or a retail space if they really wanted to do it, realizing that retail would probably require another variance. An application or 2. I'll get back to that a little bit more in depth. Let me walk through the rest of the plan now. So going down to the lower level, there's a main stair here, wide main stair that takes you down to a landing and then further down. One of the features of this building is that the building itself is bifurcated by a skylight that runs the length of the building, kind of a spine down the center of the building. So there's a lot of daylight coming into the space. And then the rear towards the landing there gives us almost a story and a half of glass, which looks into a well, which will end up being a landscaped well. So the whole idea here was to let a lot of light into the space, a lot of windows into the space, and really daylight the space as best we could. Moving to the lower level, and again, a lot of this light will be borrowed light, which will end up down on the lower level. One of the reasons we needed a lower level was to accommodate, on the left-hand side, you'll see all the safety deposit boxes. So there is a wealth of safety deposit boxes in the present facility, so this is really just bringing those safety deposit boxes across the street and putting them in a secure environment at the front of the building. We're also required to have booths for security for purposes of opening your box and being able to do so in privacy. So you'll see left and right here that they have booths with counter, so you can look through your possessions without interruption. We also have a little bit of the elevator comes down. We have a little bit of a lounge area down the bottom, which is really just a place for the break. Employees up top to take a break. There's bathrooms down here as well, which will serve primarily the employees, but they'll be accessible for the clients as well, because they can come down the elevator or come down the stairs. And it is an accessible floor by virtue of the elevator. And then we have essentially the mechanical section of the building on the lower right-hand side of the plan. I'm going to shift to. I'm going to skip past the sign drawings because Rob already discussed that, but I'm going to go to the exterior elevations. Sure.
On the plan that we have, we see the proposed vault with the safety deposit boxes. In the lower right next to the elevator, it also says proposed vault. Is that your mechanical space where it says proposed vault?
Let me blow that up a bit.
Yeah, lower right-hand side, under the ATM.
Yeah, that's misnamed. That's mechanical.
That's mislabeled, okay.
That's
All right.
mechanical. Sorry.
Thank you for bringing it to our attention.
Yes, that's
If you- While we're talking about potential mislabels, can you go back up to the first floor plan? In the proposed ATM, it also says safety deposit box room.
Yes, and that is
That's some
something.
newfangled modern safety deposit box?
It is.
Okay.
It is.
That's what these things are over here?
Yeah, on the left-hand side.
Oh, okay.
Interesting.
We're talking about having access potentially 24 hours to your safety deposit.
It's not where my Amazon project packages get delivered?
I would have guessed there was like a check desk or something
We're
there.
looking into the security aspects associated with that, but that's the intent. And drawing A3 essentially is the exterior elevations. I'm going to just orient you on these elevations. The lower left elevation is what we call the west entry, the west elevation, and this is the one that faces Hills Drive. You'll see the main PPAC Gladstone bank signage. That is probably the most visible from Hills Drive. The logo that you see below it, that green logo that was questioned before, that essentially is the branding of the bank. We have that on every one of the branch banks that I've worked on, and I've worked on most of them. So that's kind of an integral part of identifying the branch, and we think that's an important feature to maintain. And we gave that prominence on that Hills elevation. So you're looking at the use of brick essentially to match the entire center. Right now, if you notice, the shopping center and the 500 Hills all have the same brownish, purplish, bluish brick. The intent here is to carry that brick through on this building as well, so it maintains that kind of campus setting throughout the space.
It's not.
If we go to the
Just explain the light, because there was a question about the lighting.
Sure. So there will be a light essentially above the PPAC Gladstone bank portion. There's also a light above a concealed light above the logo. That logo, you can't tell in this elevation, but it's essentially recessed slightly. If you go back to the floor plan, you'll see there was a little indentation there. there'll be an area just below P-PAC Gladstone that'll illuminate that logo at night. Above it, we went to downlights essentially, but they're not shown in the corners here, but effectively, they're not a point source glare, but they're very directional in that they're all LEDs, and we can focus them directly on the lighting itself. So it's not going to be any perceived light from a distance. It's really a wash of the P-PAC Gladstone bank sign on the upper.
It's a series of spots, or is it a strip?
It's going to be a series of. It'll end up being like 3 boxes above that length, 1 box above the shorter lengths. So it effectively washes down and washes the wall.
And the letters are die cut, raised from the brick?
They are off the brick slightly, but they're not far off. They're just bin letters.
And what
And
are
it's
the
like a-
hours of operation for those lights?
We really haven't discussed that. I presume it's going to be during banking hours and maybe into dusk, just for the purposes of identification. We do have to have that 24-hour sign that I'm going to talk about in a minute illuminated at all times, and the ATM side has to be illuminated at all times. I would imagine that we'll probably want to leave that P-PAC primary sign on as well, so it's identified from the street. But it doesn't have to be, it could be on a timer basis, once you get past a certain time. This is not the important one from the usage of the 24-hour portion, but the 24-hour one would have to stay on 24 hours.
So there's like an overhang there over those letters, is that it? So
There's
the light
an
is-
overhang over there's an overhang over the logo, okay? And see if you see the purplish band there?
Yes.
It's actually just below that purplish band. That purplish band is offset on the building face by about 9-10 inches because the elevator core kind of steps in at that point. So there's a little bit of relief there. It'll show up better on the 3D renderings when we get to the 3D renderings.
Okay.
This is what's we call the north entry, and the 24-hour banking is immediately off of that handicap spot that we showed you on the plan. These decals I wanted to explain too, they serve a function. Essentially, you have a full glass door there. It's really to identify the door. It's a safety thing. We don't want people walking into the glass, so this is really, it's almost like you'd see in a shower environment or something where you ask you frosted, so nobody kind of really walk through it. So even though they're giving us the logos on there, they are internal, by the way. They aren't on the outside. We think that's an important feature for safety purposes. We also have the little tree you see in the center is part of the core well I told you about that you'll see from the inside of the building as you walk immediately through. That goes down about another half a story, so there's going to be planting in that well down below eyesight here as well. So that's a primary feature within the bank. And then you'll see the pyramid skylight that runs the spine of the building in this elevation, and also on the one that was below it down here. This is actually well beyond the lower facade. It's in the center of the building. It looks a little close there, but it's actually way back. And then you have the drive-through off to the right, which is supported by 2 columns on what will be an island. And as Rob said, the first drive lane is fully covered. The second drive lane is covered by the cantilever portion of the roof. So the transaction stays dry, but we don't have to put another set of columns out at the far side of the curb line out there. This is the elevation that you would see looking at it from 500 Hills in the other direction. It's what we're calling the east elevation. And you'll see the ATM and night drop bezel here. That's an enclosure that goes around the 2 pieces of equipment with some writing identifying the equipment there. And it sits underneath the canopy, but forward of the teller transaction area. So I forget whose concern it was, somebody at the window would have to clear that lane before somebody could use the ATM. So it's your way you turn if you're using the ATM and somebody happens to be using the window lane for a transaction.
There's a drawer at the window as
There'll be-
well as,
there'll be a-
as well as a tube out in the aisle?
There'll be probably a pneumatic there, not a drawer. We typically don't go to the drawers anymore, so it's still gonna be probably a tube system.
At the building and one at the Convoy?
Yes. And then you've got a window into what would be the manager's office there. And again, the same material that matches both the shopping center and 500 Hills will be used on the facade. This is a view of the main entry. So again, we're using the decals on the front door to identify that, and some signage up above the door. It has a cantilevered canopy here over the door for weather purposes. And you'll see the pyramid skylight that runs the length of the building. That kind of mimics, if you're familiar with 500 Hills, it has a big atrium in the center there as well. So again, we're trying to afford a lot of light to the interior, save on the electric bill, and you'll end up with a lot of very cozy space inside the building itself. I will switch to the next one. And here's the elevation, I think, that will, or the perspective. This is drawing A04. It'll kind of give you a feel for that indentation where the overweight or low it's set back. The elevator is set behind here, so the logo sits back in that recess there. It also gives you a pretty good feel for the massing of the building itself. You'll note that, again, the atrium runs the full length. I should note, too, that the canopies are translucent as well. So it's not putting things in shade, but it is giving you some weather protection here. This is also a representation of the foundation planting around the building that we're looking to achieve. And again, here's a look at what would be the backside of the building, and that well I spoke about that runs around the back, and the drive-through is off to the top side here, and here's a 24-hour access to the rear of the building. That's really my direct, but I wanted to make two comments before I finish. One was, another reason for the placement of this building is visibility. This is where it's placed on the site. This is a retail establishment, essentially a retail bank. So there is a definite need to be visible and readily accessible. So we felt that site coming into the entrance of the headquarters made a lot of sense from a visibility standpoint. The other thing I think somebody mentioned was the fact that this building is effectively a 360-degree building. You're looking at it on each side. It's not like you have a front and a back. You have four fronts. And the four fronts, more or less, need to be identified. So I think the signage is appropriate in that regard. You're really approaching this from different directions. It's important to understand where the front door is and identify it. It's also important to understand, what the building is from the street, just to identify it from the Hills Drive as you're coming in from a visibility standpoint. So, we feel really justified in the amount of signage that we propose for the building. I don't think it's overkill. I think it's really necessary, and as was pointed out before, the directional signage that are associated with the drive-through itself are pretty standard in the industry and would certainly serve to avoid a lot of confusion in the transaction lanes. And God forbid, we don't really want anybody backing up, when they realize that something's closed or you're working off you're in the wrong lane as you approach it.
I just have one question.
Sure.
Could you just tell the board with regard to the letters of the bank's name and 24-hour, what is that made of?
They're metal.
They're metal.
That's my direct. If you have questions of me, I'd be happy to answer.
I have questions.
Sure.
You've given us these views, but we don't have a view like from the street of this kind of random building in the middle of the parking lot with the bigger, larger building behind it. Do you have any, like a viewscape of any idea of what that would look like?
We didn't, unfortunately, we didn't place the other building behind it in elevation, but effectively, it's a one-story, a little over one-story, it's 16 feet high, I believe, to the parapet. So it essentially goes up a floor and a half on the building that's behind it, and the building behind it is 3 stories tall. So it's about half it's not quite half the height of the primary building, because the primary building is about 12 foot floor to floor.
So you attempted to put it all together with using the same type of architecture and materials?
Correct, yeah, so it's really meant to look like it belongs to that building, and
That's what I'm trying to get.
Yeah, and
Wish we could see
the
that,
idea being that, and it was mentioned that there will be a lot of cross interaction between these two buildings, by, not just by employees, but by customers and clients.
Yeah.
Is there currently the big green logo on 500?
There is not, I believe there's not. It's on
500. No.
It's inside, but it's on all the
inside,
branch.
but not on the outside.
It's not on the outside.
Is there one over at the current bank?
I don't believe, yes, there's one on the current bank.
Inside
But
or outside?
I don't believe their landlord, when they moved in, permitted, I think you bargained for that type of sign up top after you took most of the building. Right. At 500 Hills, they just recently, I mean, within the last 3 or 4 years.
Is that your question at 500 Hills of the logo?
Yeah, 500 if you have it on the outside. I don't remember seeing that.
I don't believe it is on the, they got permission to put the one up top once they took a major part of the
Yeah,
building.
and that's fine, it's metal, it's nuts. Other than the placement of it, which I think we're past, I don't know, I think we are past, is that big green actually logo. I mean, we don't have that on any other retail. You mentioned retail, so I'm gonna stick with retail buildings. We don't have logos, you know, PNC I don't think has a colored logo on their bank.
Infinity has it.
Who does?
They have their
Oh, up on 206?
graphic, yeah.
But it's about the size of the peak lights on back, it's just a.
Yeah, it's just a very, is that, you gotta have it? And that's just my opinion. I mean, there's other people here that might be okay with it. You know, I live in this area, and I know it's gonna be lit. You know, I see the P-PAC Gladstone Bank sign right above it.
It goes to the branding of the bank, just like any other, retail, like Starbucks, like McDonald's, like, to
But we
leave the
don't do
logo,
that.
to leave the logo off is going against the goal of branding for the building.
But, I mean, consistently throughout Bedminster, we're not really going with colored logos on, to identify buildings. I mean, I don't even.
Did the Primrose guys, didn't they have a,
They had something
didn't they
that
have a
looked like
logo in
this.
their thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was the same sort of seal.
Round seal kind of thing.
But I don't think it was quite
is there-
color like this.
Does it have to be 23 square feet?
No,
Can you accomplish that?
it could be a little smaller.
Yeah, can you because I think overall, we were at like 80-something square feet of
82.
signage. 82 square feet of signage. So I know you gotta do the 24-hour thing, 24/7, 365, et cetera, but those are 9-inch letters, maybe that could be 6-inch letters, and maybe this seal could be 15 square feet instead of 23 square feet, and now we bring that number down a little bit more, and it becomes a little less obtrusive. That's the kind
It's
of
big.
direction I'm going
If you
in
go
my
back to
mind
the
too.
whole side,
That-
you go to your
One at a
slide,
time,
farthest
one at a
side is
time, one at a
big
time,
green
please.
dot. And I'm not saying it's an ugly logo, it's fine, it's just.
Well,
it's just-
I could show you here.
It does,
too.
it draws your
I mean,
attention,
if
but.
you, again, this goes to the branding, but this is the negative image.
Oh, I get it, I
of that.
understand that.
I'm
It's
just
fine.
saying, this is a little lighter in color because it's a reverse image of that. But what we had to do in order to reduce the logo on the building is we took the border out. So in other words, we left it around to define it, and we took the border out. Now, we could make it smaller. We could play the green down by having it a little bit lighter. Frankly, I like the green a little bit better than the white.
But what do you need it for? Do you have it right above it, says Peacock Gladstone Bank?
Well, like I said, this is a branding element of the bank. It's on every piece of stationery. It's on every bill. It's on every branch bank they have, and this is a branch bank.
Could I just make an observation about that? I do think there's room for the logo to be scaled down. But from the street, I mean, most of us who know the bank know the logo because we've seen it for a long time. But the truth is, you couldn't read the name of the bank off that logo from the street, but you can read the words that they put up over the top.
True.
Because I was thinking to
I
myself,
agree with you.
what do you need both? And then I looked and I said, well, that's why you need both, right? So somebody can easily discern. And you want, and when we talk about making the letters on the building a little smaller, I appreciate that comment as well. Legibility is the big ambition that we have here.
Not those. I'm not talking about reducing those. I'm talking about the 24-hour ones over the ATM machines.
Gotcha.
So those at 12 are probably necessary.
Right, I
But
think they are.
the ones around back where the ATM machine is, you need to solve a state regulation. Let's do that as minimally as we possibly can.
I'm with you
Have
there.
we dealt, maybe, I know we sort of touched on it tonight, but whether the door logos are signage? Right, like, I don't remember another applicant coming in with a,
Yeah.
I think
Yeah,
he
that
makes a
was-
point,
that was
though,
my-
'cause they're in the
gonna be
little
my
safety
question.
dots,
Yeah,
Yeah.
but
you know,
but they are
and maybe you
signs.
can do a ribbon of Peapack Gladstone instead of the big logo thing there, but you can accomplish the safety dot situation by a little more minimally as well. And again, these are all things you included in the 84 square feet. We can almost half that 84 square feet by some sensible changes.
Yeah, I don't believe that the interior sticker necessarily counts as a sign. We did conservatively include it in the number, but it's really a safety issue. It could be something different, but again, that's part of the branding, and it'd be nice if we could.
Is it interior?
It's interior. It's
That's
on the
what-
inside face of
It's
the
an
glass.
interior decal, I don't believe it's a sign.
I don't think so
By
either, but
definition.
that's your, it depends on. your
Mr. Gordon,
interpretation.
I just like to say that we have very strict signage regulations here in Bedminster, and we try to stay consistent and provide equity for all of our business owners, and all of them want to put logos and put all kinds of stuff, but we don't necessarily always allow that. So I think there might be some room for some adjustments that we could work with, but.
Could we take a moment and just speak with our client for a second about the sign?
Sure.
Before you do that, I have one other question, because
Go.
I didn't really understand. If I look at your east and west elevations, and I look at the detail, it's not close enough for me to understand how deep it is. But that cornice work that you have there, you're going to tuck that lighting into the cornice?
Here, I'll zoom in a little bit. You can see that this is close to a foot setback.
No, I'm talking the ones that are like
cornice
flashing
on the
down
top
on
of the building.
No, I'm not putting it in the, under the cornice. It's gonna end up being a projected, a box essentially with a downlight on the box.
Well, so that'll be, so that light, so that would be applied further.
It'll
to
be
the-
appended to the cornice, right? We originally had this.
I thought you were tucking it into the cornice.
That's what I thought too,
When we
Rich.
filed
Yeah,
this-
that,
When we did file this, we originally had uplighting, and then we saw your ordinance prohibited uplighting, so.
So there's something on the elevation we're not seeing.
So if I look at, yeah, exactly.
Correct.
Right.
So if I'm looking at this elevation, for example, you're gonna mount a long sconce shining down on those numbers.
It'll be
Right.
concealed essentially visually in the cornice, because it'll be the same color as the cornice, but it'll be an offset box about this deep, and it'll run longitudinally to the sign.
Now I
For the
copy.
record, this deep is how big?
I'm saying it's gonna be a manufactured fixture, so it's probably, I'm guessing it's gonna be about 6 to 8 years.
Okay.
It'll be well lit though, you'll be able to see it.
It'll be well lit, yeah.
So no need. for
But it'll
big
be
green
purely
down.
downlit, so you're not gonna see the light source.
You mentioned you imagine the brick, you imagine the glazing and the bronze styles on the windows. as well,
Yes,
too?
yes.
I see you're taking, a lot of the design cues here are from the 500 building. The clear story or the gallery is kind of ceiling. that you-
Very intentionally, yeah.
All that glass work, all that brick work, et cetera. Personally, I hate that brick. It's so sharp and square and boring. But that's besides the point. No thought given to setting this off in some way architecturally?
Yeah, the only difference that we made, and we made it intentionally, was to give the entry a little bit more prominence and not do the brick all the way around the entry like the main building. So this is really a metal enclosure as you get to this entry and the rear entry to the 24-hour.
That's some kind of Luca bond kind of deal?
Exactly, yeah.
I think, Richard, if I could just build on what you were saying, part of the question is, and I agree with him, that that's a brick whose time came and left, and we're still stuck with it. So if there were a way for you to gracefully contrast in the parking lot something that complemented but didn't mimic the color, that might be, or might find that appealing.
Well, I don't object to that because I have the same feeling of the brick, but.
I thought you might.
We're all agreeing.
I think that that might be a question for the landlord, as, you know, he's given us the blessing to do what we're doing.
I hear you. Is that something the board would want them to pursue with the landlord? Or do you think that if it ends up looking like a match, it fits together better and we won't fight it?
I think there's enough contrast there, and then with the skylight on top, that kind of,
Okay.
gives it a little more interest.
Yeah, I don't want to send them off on a fool's errand.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and I think that, given the fact that the entire center across the street is the same material, it kind of makes.
I think it's
sense.
almost,
We're doomed with it.
yeah, right. This is
That
it.
one I would choose off the top.
Do you still want a few minutes, or are you,
Just a minute, if 2 minutes is okay.
okay, all right. Okay. All right.
So, I'm just going to interrupt the witness for 1 second.
Okay.
And just say that I've been listening and hearing what you've been saying.
Mhm.
And
Good, we like that.
I conferred with my client, and we're suggesting that the logo size be reduced by 25% of its size. And that way, it's still, you can read what it says, but it's not as large. So I think that brings it down to, and I'm not the math person here, 17 square feet.
So what's the diameter?
It brings it down to 17 square feet instead of 24 square feet.
What would the height be?
So what are we still, what are we?
What-
You're about, our original sign was about 5.5 feet in.
5.5.
Diameter.
In diameter.
In diameter.
So
In
reduce that by
diameter.
25%.
So we could get it down to about 3.5 feet probably and still see it legibly
That's,
from the
I don't
street
think
or
that's the way-
identify it
I
from
don't
the
think that's the
street.
way diameters work, but okay.
I can't argue with you because that's not my forte, but
I
I
don't
was
think you
trying to
reduced the
come up
diameter
with
by
a,
25%, reduced the area by 20%.
since it's a circle, I was trying to come up with a
Pi r
percentage.
square.
Yeah,
Yeah, right.
that's where I'm going.
So if we're getting so small, you're not
can
gonna
see
be able to
that
read it from the street anyway, why do you want it?
It's the symbol of the bank, and it's identified by a lot of people, and someone who's not, will know that symbol and will be looking for it, and that's why we're doing it. Some people put their symbol right on their name.
Yeah, but as Lou said, I mean, we're trying, that's not our town. We're not a colored logo town. I'm not saying they don't like it, I'm
That's
not.
why we're reducing it, and I think in this case where it's set back in, also, it's not something that's set out, it's set back in. It kind of is in keeping with the bank theme, kind of just like yours above your, where Madam Chairwoman is right today.
Be careful.
But that's inside.
don't make.
Yeah, we can put it inside,
Comments about our
we can
sign.
make it 20 feet. I don't know,
But-
that's just my opinion.
But
We'll see.
it will reduce the size that we're asking for considerably. Now, with the, if you don't count the signs over the canopy, and those are more of directional, as we were talking, we have a reduction there as well. And as to the door
Decals.
decals, I I mean, people have other things on their door, if you think that's a sign. We wanted to be clear, we weren't trying to hide them, so that's why we were, being obvious. We weren't sure, but we included that in the count. I'm not sure if that's included or not, but we have included it. Usually signs are things that kind of you can see from the street, and those decals, you really have to walk to the door.
Yeah, they're kind of a gray area, I think.
Yeah, they are, right.
Literally, I
And-
think.
Literally, yes. It looks like you reduce it to 65, if my math is right, 65.
If we take away what was on the canopy, you mean?
No, if we reduce the logo, by 17, oh, wait a minute, I reduced it by 17, I didn't do the right math.
Decals on the doors, that's 16 less as well, too.
Yeah.
So now we're down
Less
30.
square feet.
And how about that 24-hour banking?
Yeah, the 24-hour.
No, we can't do,
P-PAC glass.
Well, we can reduce
Rush
it,
is
we can
only
reduce
7
it.
inches, but the 24-hour banking is 9.
We can bring that down.
you could bring that
I
down
mean,
too.
that's a,
So you want the 9 to be the same as the 7?
at least.
Yeah.
Wait.
Yeah, we can bring that down to 7. That's,
17 from
So
23 is
where- what is
27.
What are the 9 and the 7? Sorry,
I feel like Monty Hall.
this one here we're
The
talking
24
about.
hour
Sign
banking,
curtain number
you want
one.
that instead of 9 to be 7.
6, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, 6 minus 2 is 70, 76. Okay, sorry, I had 76 there.
I'm sorry, I just want to be clear, so.
Yeah, so we're reducing the logo,
That's what Thomas.
Yes,
And we-
25%.
25%. And so, and then we were going to reduce the letters, the 24-hour letters, we were going to reduce the size of those to the
so the cap is.
minimum amount we need for the regulation.
So,
If it's 6 inches,
What's the diameter of the sign as designed? 5?
5.5 feet. So we're down to 17 and 17 and a quarter.
Yeah.
Well, it's going down to, so it's going to be 4.5 feet?
We've had 25% reduction, it's 4.5 feet.
thought it was down to
6
3 and a
inches.
half.
I said we could go down to 3.5
That's the way
proportionally.
the circle works.
Yeah, well,
So 3.5.
That's fine.
Yeah.
3 and a half.
I'd like to do the math for a second, so we have the information.
I got it.
I think that's what we should.
Get the big one. An engineering calculator.
Of course.
This is Tom Collins. Rob Michello said the logo sign was 23 square.
That's the diameter. Prior square to go.
3.5 brings it to 10 square feet.
We like that.
That's good.
Less than half of what they were asking.
Exactly,
So
exactly.
So it's going to be 3.5, which brings it down to 10 square feet for the logo.
Right.
On the 24-hour banking, I thought we were bringing it down to 7 inches from 9 inches.
Right.
I'm not sure how much that reduces it. If someone could do the math for me, that would be great.
Okay.
It'd be 7 inches times 8 feet.
I think it's fine. It'll be visually appealing. I think that's what we're really most about, yeah. The logo.
3.5 feet.
You lose 1 square foot.
So we lose
1 square foot there.
from that.
Okay.
Oh, 6.
So are you keeping tally of how much we're losing on all this altogether? And then we weren't, are we counting the door logos or not?
I don't think we should. I don't think they are.
So we're
What do you
not
think?
counting the door logos, you can take those
We'll
off?
drop them
We'd
off.
like to take them off.
Yeah.
In other words,
Take them out of the calculation.
We're taking them off.
Right.
Take them out.
But we're not counting the canopy wording, right? Because that's really,
No, we're keeping
Taking
that.
out the
Right.
canopy wording in the count.
No.
So what's our grand total?
We need a grand total.
The canopy wording is the minimal amount that's
Yes.
required.
Yes. And the format Mr. Collins asked, we're gonna do a chart of this to give to him and the board, so we have the exact size of each sign with the chart and the total.
Yeah, we could.
That would be very helpful.
We could redo this
Yes.
exhibit here, which gives
You
us.
can't help but look at the screen. He can't see you at all.
All right, so if I got this right, if we take out the 4.
Let me just, for the record, who's speaking?
This is Rob.
Yes.
So if I got this right, we're taking out the 4 glass translucent decal signs.
Yes.
And the drive-through canopy signs from the calculation, right? And we're
No, I don't think you can take the drive-through canopy out from the calculation. Those are technically exterior signs, so you count those, but you ask for relief from the number.
Okay, so we're still counting those signs, we're gonna keep the 12 square feet in. So if we do that, we take out the decal signs, we reduce the metal logo sign from 23 square feet to 10 square feet.
Right.
We reduce the building mounted lettering and 24 banking from 4.5 to 3.5. And the other 2 signs, the PPAC Gladstone bank signs, stay the same, right?
Yes.
All right. So all that being said,
We'll do the math right.
13 square feet reduction.
that should get us to 51.5 square feet. So say 52 square feet
For safety.
from
And of that, Rob, the part that's not commercial signage, canopy stuff?
Which is 12 square feet.
12 square feet, just so.
9 down to 40.
So if you didn't count the canopy, we would be down to 40.
Yeah.
And to what Tom is saying, you have to count it, but you can also determine it's appropriate to weight it differently.
But aren't you reducing the size of the 12 square feet because you're only going to go with the minimum required for the canopy? And I don't know, but it doesn't sound like it's the minimum required. I mean, all you really have to say is 12 feet clearance. So, I mean, how many people have more than 12 feet? I mean, that's like, I don't even know why you need it, but like you put 12 square feet, 12 feet clearance. That, 3 inches. How many feet you need?
Well,
You don't need 12 square feet.
You wouldn't, you talk about the clearance signage.
The 12 square feet is all 4 signs.
Yeah.
Right, so you got 2 signs that say open when or closed when the lanes are occupied. Right, so there's 4 signs altogether across the canopy.
I mean, the green light and the red light sort of tell you that. They're probably going to have green in the color of the sign. And
I didn't get the question.
I'm not sure there was one.
how many square feet do you need for the canopy signs to meet your minimum required signage size?
I don't believe there is a minimum, but they have to be identifiable
Right.
as you approach. These aren't big by any means. They're if anything, there's I think they're 10 inches, right?
Letter heights.
Yeah, 10 inches. The letter heights are about 6 inches, yeah. The box itself, the aluminum box is a little bit bigger. And you're correct, when it does close, the closed option does come in red. So it goes from green to red. And that's a standard piece of equipment on the banks that have a drive-through. The reason being, you don't want people to approach and go through the drive-through if it is closed. Gives you a little fair warning that you're not making the errant turn into the drive-through as long as you approach it from this side. We don't have anything on the other side, on the exiting side. So this is coming from the east side, I guess, east side.
So what do you want to say instead of 12 square feet for the total canopies?
I think we'd like to leave it the same, but it's not that, I'm making a point that it's not, it's a standard size, it's not oversized in it by any means.
These signs you're only going to see really when you're going into the.
I don't think we have a problem with those, do we? We're okay with that, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So realistically, if we don't include those, or we're asking for a waiver of those, we're down to 40 square feet, and your ordinance allows us 22. So we've reduced the size.
Yes, I think it's
considerably.
considerable. I think that's much better. Yes, thank you.
And I think the point I made earlier is that, this is a 360-degree building, so 22 square feet was probably contemplated for a single front facade where we really have multiple front facades.
Right,
No,
that is part of the logic for why additional signage would make sense. That's a good point.
You have 4 drive around the whole building, and you have more than one entrance, because you have to go to the ATM.
All right, I'd quit while you're ahead.
Yes,
Yeah.
If I could just bring up now our traffic parking easement, if I could. There was a report submitted to the board, it's part of the record. So I'm just going to briefly have our expert,
I'm going to apologize for referring to the traffic guy, okay? Apologize.
Rihanna Kirchhoff, Kirchhoff.
Brianna, please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
You're employed in what capacity?
I'm a senior project engineer at Dolan and Dean Consulting Engineers. I'm a licensed professional engineer in the state of New Jersey. I graduated from Stevens Institute of Technology with a Bachelor of Engineering in Civil Engineering. And I've been in the industry for approximately 10 years and have been accepted as an expert by several boards in the state.
I think that's
Board
fine.
accepted.
Yes, please.
And as I stated to the board, a traffic impact assessment was submitted with regard to this application.
Yes.
And could you just briefly tell the board your findings as to whether the parking circulation will work adequately without causing any problems to the balance of the site and the roadway?
Our office conducted parking counts in October 2021, and what our study found was that during the peak parking period, our counts were done between 10 a.m. and 3:30 p.m., so that's really when you have employees sitting still at their desks, no one's going anywhere. Your peak period was found to be 11:30 to 12:30, where 250 vehicles were parked on site. We also were able to obtain occupancy data. Seeing as it's COVID, a lot of people are working from home or have a hybrid operation. So during that time, we had approximately 282 employees on site at that time.
I'm sorry, when you're talking about on-site, you're talking about 500 and 550 or just 500?
500 and 550.
Perfect, thank you.
So there were 282 employees that were reporting to work during the time of our counts. So what we did was we found out how many employees report to those 2 office buildings total outside of COVID times, which was given to us to be 501 employees. So we extrapolated. We found a rate based on the occupancy of the number of employees in the building versus the number of parking stalls. And what we determined was that under a full, pre-COVID conditions where everyone was reporting to work, there would be 445 parking spaces occupied by just the office building. So that leaving us with a surplus, if we do not construct the 19 parking stalls, we would have a surplus of 233 vacant stalls in the lot. Obviously, that's not needed for the bank, but there is excessive parking. So if the building does need additional parking, there's more than necessary on site.
And did you get a chance to review the site plan as where the bank is being constructed and the circulation pattern?
Yes, I did.
And what was your finding in that regard?
The location of the bank where it's proposed makes sense due to the proximity of the main drive aisle, the interaction between the office building and the proposed bank. In addition, and I believe Mr. Michella had referenced it, they are proposing to be able to keep six vehicles in the drive-through. Our office has counted, done observations at countless banks in the state. you see a maximum queue of usually 4, so there should be sufficient to accommodate the demand at the bank.
And do you think that the circulation in the parking lot will be affected at all by this new structure, new building?
No, I think the circulation is acceptable.
Also, with regard to the parking and the proposed parking, is there any other state requirements that might come into play with regard to the parking lot?
Yes, the electric vehicle requirement. The latest legislation says that we would be required to install 1 electric vehicle stall, so we plan to comply, and that would be located along the parking stalls that are proposed on the west side of the building, proximate to the ADA stall.
So for the board's edification, there's a requirement law that went into effect last summer that requires electric charging or stations, depending on what you're building and how many parking spots. So we just informed the bank that they were going to be subject to that, and so that there would be a requirement to put 1 electric charging station in.
Okay.
So we wanted to make sure the board is aware that that's state requirement that's now
Yes,
going to be mandated.
we understand that.
And in your opinion, will the requirement or the request for the variance for the parking for the overall site, the continuing variance, as opposed to the 800 and, I don't remember the number
14.
off the top. Yeah, 14 that are required, could that be justified based upon your study?
Yes.
And also moving the bank here, will it have any detriment to the entrance and exit off of Hills Drive for the traffic?
No, we did traffic analyses at the intersection of the driveway opposite the driveway for Hills Village Center, and what we found was that with the added traffic generated by the proposed bank, there's no degradation in level of service criteria.
And now that you know the bank is moving from one side of the street to the other, it's really not an increase in anything, is it?
Right. We didn't account for that, so our analysis is conservative, but obviously it's just transposing traffic from one location to the other.
And your findings are all in the report that was submitted to the board?
Correct.
Except for the change in parking.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
And
Board?
except for the electric charges?
And the electric charges.
I have a couple of questions.
Yes.
Parking is a major issue, so I think regardless of, how COVID has changed things, how people use office space, et cetera, I think, you may have 10,000 square foot tenants suddenly become 5,000 square foot tenants, but I think even at 5,000 square foot, their utilization of space is still going to remain very high. Okay, so while you might have 10 tenants of 10,000 square feet in a 100,000 square foot building, you may have 20 tenants of 5,000 square feet in that same building going forward, because each tenant is not necessarily going to require the same amount of space. But I think the utilization will stay the same. People aren't going to be spending less money, aren't going to want to spend more money per employee to accommodate them within their space, if you're following my logic. So if I spend $3,000 per employee for office space, I want to push that to $2,000 per employee for office space. So utilization is going to remain high, just so people can run their businesses more efficiently. We may have more tenants, but, so when you make an assumption that utilization of the parking lot at 500 people is a pre-COVID number, I don't think that's a pre-COVID number at even 80% utilization, if the building was 80% leased. We have a code that calls for 4.5 per thousand in town, or 4.44 or something like that in town. That's our requirement. They're able to do that even with their 800 plan at something less than 50% lot coverage. So reducing that for the purposes of your analysis, and to use those lower numbers in your analysis, I'm not sure we've examined the potential projected intensity that may well be when the world turns around another 10 times. Because I just think it's very, very conservative, the estimations you've made in terms of how that may impact, circulation around the new building, utilization of the parking lot, how it may impact other people using the 550 building and their access to the building in the morning, or when they want to get out at lunch and they got a half hour for lunch and they want to, get out and do some shopping or go to the post office, et cetera. 501 seems very, very low to me. And I'm not sure how you really came to that, except to say it was a pre-COVID number, which in a building that was 60% utilized, maybe that works. But one day, that landlord would like to see their building 90% leased, I would expect.
That was the employee count that we got in terms of who occupied the space and their anticipation to have their employees back at work as of January 2022. So that was the projection we got for what they expected to come in earlier this year. But, more people are working from home part of the week, but the office space stays the same. So what we did with our counts was we projected how much parking would be utilized by the people who would be returning to the office for this hybrid work environment.
So you're suggesting that even though someone might be designing space to accommodate as many as 5 per thousand on any particular day, all those 5 per thousand wouldn't show up?
Correct.
I don't think we can really anticipate that so much, Rich. I understand where you're going.
I'm saying we have a code that says 4.5,
I
and
know.
making assumptions
I
at like
understand.
2.5.
I understand, but at the same time, they have the availability to do it.
They have it pre-approved.
They have it pre-approved.
Right, they
So I
already have
understand what you're saying.
897
Again, I'm not talking about the 800 spots. I'm talking about the impact that a fully utilized parking lot with 800 cars will have on the impact that this bank will have in a fully utilized parking lot with 800 cars, not 501 cars. That's where I'm going.
If I could maybe clarify a little bit, can you put so we have a 4.5 space per 1,000 square foot ordinance requirement. I don't know if that's solely based on parking demand. So can you put that into context with the board in terms of, let's say, ITE parking generation demand, how that translates? What's a typical parking generation demand? And explain to the board how those numbers are generated.
So ITE publishes parking rates based on data that's collected at sites across the country. So how that's done is it's based off of a building area, and then based on these research counts, how many spaces are occupied. I don't have the information in front of me to run the numbers for the office building in terms of what ITE would project, but that's typically how it's done.
Would it be fair to say that rate's around 3.8 to 4.2 in that range?
Typically, yes.
Right, so a lot of times when ordinances are created for parking ratios, sometimes they just create a round number because the math's easy, and it's not always based on demand. The ITE parking generation numbers are based on they go to counts, they go to actual sites, they count, and they say how much is your square footage, and they'll divide, and they'll come up with a regression point. They'll say, okay, on average, it comes about 3.8 to 4. It dances around 4. Before COVID, everyone went to the open office concept, and they were jamming as many people as they could into the square footage, right? And those numbers were jacked up to about 5.5, 6. I saw 6.5, 7 in some areas, right? For certain types of businesses. General office buildings were running around that 5.5 to 6 because they were trying to pack as many people as they could into the floor areas, so the parking ratios were going off the charts. So it's a lot of function of how they lease the space, and what you're saying, but sometimes an ordinance requirement isn't necessarily based on actual activity and demand requirements, so it's important to understand how the demand number compares to an ordinance number. So if the demand number were to be around the 4 per thousand, how would that translate to demand here? We have about 180,000 square feet here.
4 per thousand is going to be about 700 spots.
You're around 650, 700 in that number if you were at full demand. So if you look at that compared to the 890.
No,
814.
814.
So that includes the 10 for the bank.
Yeah, you're
Right.
You're a little under.
I just feel like we're making a case that our parking requirement could be less than 3 per thousand. That's what it seems like to me. We're making a case that the next applicant that comes in can make an argument for less than 3 per thousand, and
Well, I think
and we believe that would work.
I think they were saying it was performing at 3 per thousand, and I think it's better analysis to look at, maybe not necessarily the full ordinance, but you gotta look at the IT demand and say, looking at around 3.8 to 4 per thousand is probably the way to look at actual demand.
I just asked you a question, you know, the board has to look at each property and each applicant individually, and if there's a case for it here, it does not mean there's a case for it someplace else. But we have a history on this site, we have a history of how it's operated. Remember, we came here years ago, it's all the same history. Way offices are being used today has changed. I mean, we all in the industry know that. We know it because if you go to hire people, no one wants to be hired in an office and work 5 days a week at their desk in the office. It's just the way the world is changing. But that desk is still going to be there for the 5 days a week.
But based on the approvals that you have for the full build out of the
Could
park,
put them in.
you exceed the ordinance requirements.
Correct.
Including the bank. So if you were
Correct.
to take the 4.5 per thousand parking ratio that the town has for their ordinance, and project that out, including the bank, you're still under what you have your ultimate approval.
Correct.
And in theory, it would be in their interest, because they have the ability to go in and build more parking. If the property owner found out they needed more parking, you got to think they would apply for the permit and do it. In some instances like this, though, where you're being asked to grant a variance, you might want to have a trigger where something happens and they have to build a certain amount.
Frank, I feel like you can't stand here and tell me that. I'm not saying you, but someone can't make the argument to me that I may eventually need 800 spots. I have this approval in the bank, and that's in my back pocket for posterity. You can't make the argument that I'm going to need 800 spots at some point in time, and then tell me that your traffic analysis is based on 500 cars. Because one day, that lot may be filled.
Rich, this is Tom now. That is not exactly what's happening. Maybe the engineer can explain it, but her projection on traffic in her report is actually based on projections of traffic, not parking. All right? They're two different projections. All she was doing about parking was helping provide data and a projection of actual parking on this site to demonstrate that it won't be more than that. It probably won't be more than that number, but that's not how she got her traffic intersection projection numbers. Okay? Maybe she can.
Maybe I misheard. Can you go back and describe how you arrived at the 501?
Sure. So we were provided data about the number of employees that worked in the building while we conducted our counts in October. And that number was 282 employees reporting to the office. Then the plan was, while we were doing our data collection, was that all the employees would be required to come back to work 4 to 5 days a week starting in January 2022. So we wanted to be able to project how many more parking spaces would be occupied when the full workforce comes back that's anticipated to be there as of January 2nd, 2022. And that's where the 501 comes in, is that we were provided this.
All right,
data.
Tom, what did I miss here, Tom?
So she did use that for the trips per intersection per peak hour. That's a different projection.
Correct.
You were I'm not criticizing, but you were sort of conflating a parking estimate or projection with her traffic analysis, which is there is a different analysis in her written report about the intersections. That uses different statistics.
not based on the 501?
Right.
Oh, all right, so then what number were those other statistics based on, if not 501 cars parked in that lot?
So,
The trip generation we were talking about.
so the trip so the analysis of the intersection is different in terms of how we arrived at what would be generated by the site. So similarly, we created a rate. Obviously, we counted the driveway of our site that's close to where we're proposing the bank. So we counted that driveway and we generated a rate based off of the number of employees arriving to work. And then,
I'm not sure what I'm missing. I really am not. I think I understand what you're saying.
so you
So
generate,
at the intersection of Hills, the double driveway coming out of the property, all right, that intersection is what you're trying to determine in terms of trip generation.
correct.
If there's 800 cars in the lot, there's more trips coming through that through that intersection than there would be if there was only 500 cars in the lot coming through that intersection. That's like 60% more cars, by the way, right?
Right. But
So
parking
how come that wouldn't
spaces
impact your
don't,
chip generation?
parking spaces don't generate traffic. It's the use that generates the traffic. So it's based on the number of employees coming in, which we have account for under, October conditions. And then we used a rate to project the remaining number of employees that would arrive during the peak hour using that rate.
Okay.
That's different in terms
Okay.
of parking.
All right, now I think I understand.
Anyone else from the board?
Just one question.
Yes.
We have the sidebar conversation. Are you proposing to identify any parking spaces specific for the bank use?
I believe that's our intention, yeah.
How many would you propose? Okay, you can answer that.
We're approximating 6 parking spaces would be designated for the bank use.
So you're going to provide a sign at 6 parking spaces. Which 6 would they be? Would they be the ones along the west side?
Yes.
Signs at the head end of the space?
Yes.
So the westerly parking spaces, where there's a remote parking space, the applicant's going to designate 6 as bank, exclusive bank parking.
Okay. Does no one else has any questions for parking? Okay. No one else, Janine, for public? No, we're still good. Okay.
One last witness, if I could.
Okay, yes, we want to cut it off at 10 o'clock if we can. I don't want to rush her, but, yes.
Hi, good evening, Chairwoman, members of the board. How are you all?
Good.
My name is Kate Keller. I'm a professional planner and I'm a principal.
Kate, please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you, Kate.
Thanks. Yes, I'm a professional planner with the firm of Phillips Price Greigel Laney Hughes LLC based in Hoboken, New Jersey. I have appeared before this board, but not in an expert quantity. Was slightly different, but I do have undergraduate and master's degrees in urban planning from the University of Pennsylvania, and I am a licensed professional planner in the state of New Jersey and have been for approximately 10 years.
Okay.
Yes, the board recognizes and accepts the qualifications of Kate Keller as a professional planner.
Thank you very much.
Did you have the opportunity to look at the plans that were submitted and listen to the testimony of the other witnesses this evening?
Yes, I did.
And based upon your review of the plans and the report and the testimony this evening, do you have an opinion to give the board as to whether the variances that are being requested and waivers are justified in this regard?
Yes, I do believe that the variances, which include the D4 FAR variance, which is relatively minor but does count as a D variance, and the C variances and the 1 waiver are justifiable.
And could you give the board the reason why they are justifiable?
Sure. I'm just going to run through each of these, which I know have been enumerated by our previous witnesses. But just to begin with the D4 variance, which in this case, this board in its capacity as a board of adjustment has the power to grant this variance for particular cases and for special reasons in situations where the FAR floor area ratio exceeds the maximum permitted in the zone. And in this case, the focus isn't on the use, because this is a permitted use in this zone. Banks with drive-throughs are specifically permitted, but the focus is really on whether the site can accommodate any problems that are associated with the FAR. And the applicant must also meet the negative criteria, which I'll address for the DNC variances altogether at the end briefly. And in this case, this is a very minor increase in FAR on a site that's already technically over, where it's 0.26, where 0.25 is permitted, and it's being increased by really what's 4 1/1000ths of the ratio here, going up by just the addition of the 1,300 square feet, or about a little more than that when you count the basement. So, in this case, it's not really affecting the overall function of the site in terms of its FAR, which really measures the intensity of non-residential use on this property. The site already functions as it is, and as you've heard testimony tonight, the location for the bank branch was chosen basically because it will impact the flow of traffic and circulation and everything generally on the site in the most minimal way possible. So in that sense, the added floor area, in this case, when you just look at the site in particular, it's not going to have a significant impact. And when you look at the area in particular, going off the site a little bit, it's really just going to take existing traffic and move it onto the site in a very way that's going to really be negligible in the future of the general vicinity. So you've heard testimony from the applicant as to the needs for this. And I think that, and really, this minor increase in floor area really represents an overall better functioning for the site in comparison to what's existing across the street, and will really help the bank consolidate their facilities and upgrade them. Everything, besides the parking and the signage, which we'll get to, the applicant meets all of the buffer, the setback requirements, and it's relatively an unobtrusive structure in general. So in that case, they're not really going to be, not significant visual detriments here, and I think that in general the site can accommodate any of those minor problems. In terms of the C variances, I think that both the parking, which we've discussed, and the signage, both of which we've discussed kind of at length tonight, or really can be justified under the C2 criteria, where the benefits outweigh the detriments. With the signage, this is a unique site in several ways, which is that it's standalone site. It really does have that 365-degree facing, where it has more needs than something like simply like a shopping center with just one frontage would have. And plus, in addition to that, there are the the signs that are required for ATM uses and banks in general. So, when you really look at what's being proposed here, it is signage that, while it's larger than what's permitted, which is really considering for just one facade, the signage is it's not obtrusive. It's all just pin-mounted metal in general for the major facade signs. And I think that with the reductions that have been proposed tonight, everything's going to generally be consistent with other signage throughout the township. As you've heard, the signage will assist with wayfinding, will assist with circulation on the site, and that's crucial with the drive-through situation like here. And then in terms of the parking, I think, we are technically requesting a variance here because those parking spaces will not be replaced, but it's really kind of a unique situation because there is already an approval in place that would allow the applicant, or the property owner, to expand the parking lot in a manner that would not only accommodate the proposed new bank, which is only 10 spaces, but would exceed your ordinance requirements, which is again that 897 versus 814 that's been discussed tonight. So, I think there's been a lot of talk tonight about flexibility in terms of like reusing buildings and what's the future of office space, and I think that this parking requirement and the parking regulation, the parking configuration that's being proposed really allows the site to function efficiently, to not have to increase impervious coverage where it isn't necessary, but does provide both this applicant, the bank, and the property owner with some options given future flexibility of office work, and not really having a full understanding about what those ratios might look like in the future. But again, the approval that is in place does exceed ordinance requirements, even with this bank, the new spaces being taken into account. Just to briefly touch on the negative criteria, which is that, these variances, including the FAR and the C variances, I don't believe they will cause any impacts on visual environment, drainage, environmental constraints, et cetera. You've heard testimony regarding the traffic impacts, which will be negligible for this use, particularly because there is an existing branch across the street that will be closing. There's not going to be visible from any nearby residential uses. And in terms of the zoning ordinance and master plan, this is a proposed use in a zone, and it's compatible with many of the other uses in the zone and in the neighboring area, including, again, the branch that currently exists nearby. With regards to the FAR, it's a very minor addition as far as volume, as far as mass on the site, and I don't believe it will impair the intent of the zone plan or the master plan. So that is...
One more question. One of the board members was concerned that if a variance is granted to this applicant, how would that affect other applications that came before this board? Would it have any impact on that?
No, I mean, the board is supposed to consider each application on its own, and while a variance runs with the land, it only runs with the land that it sits on. It would not provide any sort of legal precedent or from the board's quasi-judicial standpoint to grant a similar variance.
And would you consider this application unique, how it's situated on the property and the property situation?
Yes, I think it is. I think, given much of the surrounding commercial development, this is a unique setup where it's an existing tenant, long-time business in the community that's seeking to kind of bring their retail branch on the same lot as their office branch and really consolidate it there, but take it kind of out of the shopping center context and kind of have it in a standalone building that really mimics the existing building, but while preserving its visibility from major roadways and convenience for Bedminster's residents and businesses.
And you know we need a variance waiver for the light level?
Yes, thank you. Yes, there is one. The last waiver, technically a design waiver, is for the illumination, which is higher than what is permitted per ordinance. And this is also related to the proposed use, which is that ATMs have to have a certain level of lighting per state law. And it's been designed here as it is for most other banks, where it will be unintrusive, it will not interfere with visibility off the site. It is simply to provide safety and security for the ATM. And I don't believe it will have a significant impact.
Thank you. Board, any questions for our witness? Professionals, anybody? Anything more?
That was impressive.
I thought so.
Time for you to decide.
I have no further witnesses.
Okay. How does the board feel about the parking issue? Should we let them not put the 19 parking spaces back and let them bank those as well? Do you agree with that?
No.
Can we
I think they
create
should
some
put them all
sort of
back.
trigger?
Okay. Excuse me?
Can we create some sort of trigger?
We can do whatever we want.
I mean, what could be used as a trigger, I guess, is my question,
They're not
right?
looking, but they're not looking for relief on that.
No.
They are, it is a variance, but the variance that they're proposing is just a temporary deferral, which means that, and that's what was granted the last time, the prior approval includes a requirement, and this will too, that if the township engineer deems the additional parking spaces are necessary, that the township engineer can require it, and the applicant shall install them. And then on the other side of that, if the applicant decides that, and that's the owner in the prior application, decides to proceed with the future implementation of the additional, I think it's 890, whatever the additional is up to the total number, that the applicant has the authority to do that under the prior approval. So it's both a township engineer implementation requirement and mechanism. We already have that and it'll continue here. And it's an applicant and owner's authority to do it if they need it as well.
They came in here tonight prepared to add back all those spots.
19.
19 spots. Again, they're not looking for relief on the parking.
But it was our discussion that it would look nicer if they didn't.
Required by law, Rich.
Because they were going around the perimeter and taking away green space by all of those locations where they.
Right now, they don't need them.
It's just going to trigger them doing something more fantastic later on, but I don't agree with
Well,
that.
they already have the approval.
Yeah, they already have.
That much sooner, they may get by with the 697 that much longer without having to do this. I think this is 19, adding the 19 spots just, is a little shield against them doing a more dramatic parking lot expansion later on.
But if they want to do more dramatic parking expansion later on, they already have approval for it.
Why are we giving them relief?
Because.
That's my question.
Why
Because we want the
why pave green space when you don't have to?
And when you don't need it.
Why is our coverage at 65% and they're not even at 50? They're not even at 50.
But we know.
Listen, I'm not the only one who votes. I just don't agree why we're giving them relief that they're not asking for.
Okay, all right.
I don't know that
Just thought it would be in our best
they're not
interest.
asking for.
What?
I'm not sure we're giving them relief they're not asking for.
They came in here tonight prepared to put all those spots back and more.
Right. but
Oh, okay, Rich.
That's
You would-
not-
in
You
order-
would say build them now. Is that what you're saying, Rich?
Was that Tom?
Yes.
Your point is you would just say build them now. Build the 19 extra now.
It was 19 blue spots that they circled on their plan?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, your point is,
Those spots, instead of any of the other ones they had approved that could also do the job, they would now be eating up the green buffer area. That was the point.
Again, they're at 45%.
So
They're going to put back 19 spots and they're going to go to 46%. They're not taking away that much green. Plus, they can go to 65 eventually.
Right.
Without even coming here, by the way.
Yeah, but I think that they could, doesn't mean we want them to.
Or that they have to.
Well, again, but then we should change our ordinance. We should change our ordinance to
No,
2.3 on parking and then
no.
40% on lot coverage.
No.
Because we think it's better to have green space. I don't disagree with that concept, but then we should change our ordinance.
No,
that's
no,
not-
no,
I think that's.
We're
no.
looking at this case individually, and we see the
And
traffic
it's-
that goes through that parking lot, and how empty that parking lot is most of the time, and don't see an additional need to add 19 more spaces on a parking lot that traditionally is empty.
Kathy, the parking lot's not full.
Right.
And not just because of COVID, because the building isn't well leased. One day, the building could be well leased,
Well, then they have
and they need
bank.
every one of those parking spots.
Okay, well, then that's when they'll build them.
Again, they didn't ask for that. We're giving it to them.
Okay.
Tom,
Fine.
do you have enough to go with a resolution?
yes, I do. But Rich, one point for Rich to understand is this property is kind of unique in its coverage in that it has a detention basin that's 40 years old that serves as a regional detention basin, which creates open space, bringing that percentage of coverage down to the 45%. So you can't really use that ordinance standard without sort of an awareness of the prior history of that drainage arrangement. So every site is unique though, and I appreciate everything everyone's saying. So if the board is ready, I would propose to you a motion to approve the preliminary and final site plan and related D variance, C variance, site plans exceptions as described in the hearing tonight with the condition discussed this evening, but also with the clear understanding that there is the waiver with a deferral of the present implementation of any additional parking spaces subject to a requirement that the applicant shall construct such additional spaces as the township engineer deems necessary, or that the applicant or owner decides to proceed with it in accordance with the previously approved plan and the 19 blue spaces on this plan. We understand that the applicant will provide us with a chart through Mr. Michella of both the parking calculations as approved and the signage variance as granted, and the changes to the signage as described by the applicant will be implemented. This approval will be effective this evening, provided the applicant is subject to compliance with all other requirements before proceeding. So is there such a motion?
Yeah, I'll make the motion.
Seconded.
Roll call, Janine?
Mr. Trevelyan?
Nay.
Mr. DeGreen?
Yes.
Ms. Sotavon?
Yes.
Mr. Walter?
Aye.
Ms. Christie?
Aye.
Mr. Rodriguez?
Aye.
Chairwoman Gotcha?
And aye for me too, yeah.
Sorry. Jeffrey Leonard? Aye. Chairwoman Gotcha?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Tried.
And good luck.
Get it in.
Yes. You did a great job. Okay, that's all we have, and so, any more comments from the board? Seeing none, we need a motion to adjourn?
Make a motion to adjourn?
Second. Good job.
Good job. Say goodnight.